Hey everybody, we're going to go live here in a few seconds. I hope you are all ready because we do have a very special guest tonight, and it should be quite interesting and a good show. So just
Wait,
sit
wait
back.
a minute. Wait a minute.
Huh?
Wait, cut,
What-
cut.
What's up?
It, weren't you live when you said we're going to go live in a few seconds?
Oh yeah.
Okay, I was just checking.
Oh wait,
Carry on.
that doesn't make sense, does it? But no, we're gonna actually start the show here in a few seconds. Is what I meant to say. We are live, but we're gonna. I'm gonna play the intro. You know what I meant. Uh, anyway, so yeah, just sit back, relax, and
I like the private comment, but go ahead.
oh man, I didn't even see the private comment. Oh, okay.
I'm our
Yeah,
special guest. That's funny.
yeah, exactly. But just sit back, relax, undo your slacks, and get ready because Shifty Sunday starts right now. Hey everybody, Hebro77 here. I'm your host with the most that likes flat earth blood on my toast. Hebro77 here, along with good old Sagittariusly speaking, who don't take no smack from any kind of jack. He's a little whack, but he is our friend, Sagittariusly speaking. And of course, Armor Up, who by the way, I forgot what I was going to say about him, but he's with us as well tonight. I had something all ready for you too, and I just
Yeah. See,
drew a blank. Yeah.
see how it is.
What
Hey,
did
I,
you
mu- I
say?
must say I like that new intro. That's awesome. I like that.
Well, thank you.
Yeah. As much as I'm partial to the old one, I enjoyed the new one as well. But what is it you said you like on your toast? Flat Earth blood?
Flat Earth blood. I thought that's what he said.
Yeah,
I didn't know that was
What
a thing.
what is that?
Yeah.
that's from slaying all the flat earthers. You see,
Okay.
that's
I
a
see.
salvatory thing. You put their blood on your toast.
Okay. It's like, okay. I'm just going to leave it at that.
No, of course I kid, but you know
That's,
what can I
that's
say?
what that's what you came up with, huh?
Yeah,
Uh,
I mean, I'm just kidding. I love my flat earthers, man.
hey, I'm partially flat myself.
I
I'm just
don't think so, Saji. I don't think so. I think the last time I seen you, you were quite round. I'm just saying.
well, that is true. I do resemble that. However,
I am too.
However,
um, I think the shape of the Earth is more debatable than it is concretely known to be factually any shape. But that's my answer. I'm going to stick with it.
I think there's much better things to debate and investigate myself personally than the
Yes,
shape of the world. Other
yeah.
than
I don't want to.
especially the physical shape of the world. I think the allegorical and the spiritual and the that shape of the world is more fascinating.
Yes, I agree. And really, is what matters more than the shape of the realm is the shape of your realm. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
But
Mine,
but
I
I
get
don't.
I smell where you're cooking.
mine's kind of rectangular. It makes it hard for me to get outdoors, but
Right. Yeah, sometimes that can be the case. If your floor is clean and your counters are all wiped off, you're off to a great start. That's what I always say.
It's always what you find in the closets that gets you, though.
oh
I
You
yeah,
know,
ever
right?
notice that?
Or when you move something that's been against the wall for a long time and realize how much dust and debris can fall into unchecked places.
I'm
That's where
okay
that
with it.
hamster went that your daughter lost a year ago. Yeah, I know what you mean.
I'm okay with the dust and webs and the dead hamsters. It's the spiders that I don't like, that crawl out from that piece of cardboard that you move from your wall.
Okay, yeah, I'm not a big fan of spiders either, but I don't know, man. It looks like we got a lot of people in already here with us tonight. That's for sure.
Do we?
And since
Yeah.
a new name also, and I love the name Stone Hobbit. What a cool name.
Stone Hobbit. Is that what happens when you smoke too much weed and then you hobbit over to the kitchen? Fix a
No,
snap.
that's what happens when you smoke too much weed.
Okay.
You hobbit over to the kitchen to get yourself a sandwich.
Yeah.
Either that or it's a little guy that looked at Medusa. But don't.
Oh, hey, good one. Good one. So Saji,
Yes.
and I guess the same applies to Armor too. How did your guys' weekend go?
I don't know. Mine was rather uneventful, but in a good way. We had some weather come through here not recently, but yeah, I don't really have much to say. I don't have any interesting tales to tell or anything like that.
The ants didn't carry you off?
No, answer and check.
All right, cool. How about you, Armor?
Yeah, I had an all right weekend. Same as Saturday, nothing great and special, but nothing horrible either. I mean, I dug out the ditch so it would run better when it rains and, stuff like that. But yeah, pretty good weekend. Weather was better. Still chilly. It was like 70s a week or so ago. And now it's been more like 40s and 50s, but still not bad.
I've had the same weather. It's been like hot and cold. A few days ago, man, it was like you said, in the 70s, and now it's down in the 50s, 40s and 50s. And
it's 38 right now here, so
really
still getting chilly at night.
57 here. But how about you, Sag? I don't know. You know what? I don't want to hear from you.
No, we don't even care about. We don't want to hear. Why would you ask Sadie what his weather's like?
I know,
He's
right?
in the sunshine state.
Yeah.
For goodness'
It's
sake.
one of those things that if you don't ask, I won't tell.
Yeah, we're up here where it snows and blows, and you want to know how it is in Florida. I'm sure it's fine. You know what I mean? Hey, shout out to Michael Fontaine over there, and Nicole Ackerman joining us live. Nice to see you, Miss Ackerman.
Yes,
or
awesome.
Mrs. Ackerman. I'm not sure whichever is appropriate.
Yes, and like Hebrew said, we do have a very special guest getting ready here to join us here in just a minute. His name is Andreas Zertis. There is a link to his channel in the description on the title card or whatever, and it is a YouTube channel that I have been following for several years now, probably 3.5, 4 or 5 years, and it's one of my favorite YouTube channels. He doesn't post things every day. Maybe sometimes he might not even post something all week, but when he does post something, oh brother, let me tell you.
Oh brother.
Oh brother.
Yeah, I agree, Nicole. We got ripped off on the global warming scam in Pennsylvania. It never really hit. I don't know what the global warming is all about.
What's the difference between global warming and climate change anyway?
I don't think there is one. They just like to change the names up every once in a while to keep the conspiracy theorists guessing. I don't know. Who knows?
I think they changed it to climate change because they weren't getting enough warming to keep that.
That could be it. Look, they're not buying the warming. It's freezing over there. So we're going to have to change it. How about climate change? Ooh, I like that.
That way, anytime the climate changes, we can be right.
Yeah.
I think
it went from fall and then to winter. Look at that climate change. Now it's spring. Climate change.
Yep.
Yeah.
They had to put their little spin on it. Yeah.
Care about it, people.
Yep.
Yeah.
So
we have an awesome guest coming on. I have to agree. Definitely check out his channel. It's fascinating. Very fascinating.
We could have done a whole show on what he said just in the back alone.
Oh, I know. We had a good half hour, 45 minutes of awesome show that you guys will never get to see now, but perhaps someday.
Yeah, perhaps. But who knows? Maybe we will be able to recreate the magic here. Did you want to play that video clip that I gave you before
Yeah.
you bring him in, or you just want to drop him in?
Yes, let's play that first, and then we'll bring him in.
All right, go right on ahead.
Wait, which one?
Either one, you choose.
All right, cool. I know which one I want to play.
Oh no, you're gonna let Hebrew choose? Okay, here we go.
Let's see here. Yoda Swamp. Shifty Sunday, right?
Yeah.
All right.
Shifty Sunday.
Shifty Sunday.
If you guys are going to go grab a snack or get you some popcorn or use the bathroom, you better go now because you don't want to miss none of this. What's about to happen? I'm telling you.
Yep, you're gonna be riveted. You ain't even gonna want to take a break. So, grab a jug, keep it beside you for an emergency, perhaps. Whatever you need to do.
Whoops.
Go put coal in your generator, whatever it is you got to do, my man.
I think I clicked the wrong one. All right, hang on.
Imagine that.
Are you sure you sent it to Shifty Sunday? Hold on. Okay, let's see here. Talk amongst yourselves, please.
The one says it has He-Man in it. You can play that one.
No.
Or you can go up to the one with the guy with the guitar.
The guy with the guitar.
Yep.
No.
Play this after intro, maybe.
I was gonna play the Alex Jones one. Where's that?
No. We weren't going to do that one right now. We were going to do one of those two. Yeah.
Oh, because I wanted to talk to him about Alex Jones. Okay.
Yeah, we'll get to that, but I mean, this is just to set him up for coming in, man.
All right. So there's one on He-Man. Where's that at?
It's at the very most recent link I gave you.
Most recent link. The most recent link. Okay. I guess so. This is how things work, okay?
This is how we roll with the Hebrew channel.
Typical us figuring it out. I mean, it wouldn't have it any other way, I guess.
Tekka? No.
I think I mean, it's the link. There's only one link. It's right there next to StreamYard. You can't miss it.
Speed of over 17,000.
All right. Okay. Let's share that screen.
Roll that beautiful bean footage.
Here it is, I think. Saji, I hope you're right about this. Is this it?
It looks right. Let's play it for about a minute.
All right, here we go.
Miles per hour.
Okay, I see. All right, and now half of our audience is rolling on the floor having a seizure.
That or they're glad they took what they took before the show started because that really looked cool.
Yeah. No, honestly though, that was pretty cool. So with that being said, you can check his channel out. I put the link in the description. And with no further ado, ladies and gentlemen, Saji, I'll let you introduce him.
Andreas Zertis.
Andreas Zertis?
Yes. That's it. Not the one, the only, the legend.
Yes. The
Andreas
living
Zertis.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean,
thank you.
Come on, guys.
All right.
The one,
here he is.
the only. All right.
Hey, everybody. How's it going?
Hello. Sorry about our the lunatics are running the asylum here. In case you didn't know.
I figured it out. I'm pretty glad to know. Yeah, don't be careful though about like those non-heliocentrics out there. You know, they'll jihad for the truth. I don't know if you saw last couple of years, the Earth's atmosphere proved the moon. NASA, European Space Study, they all show that the moon is in our atmosphere. I mean, all of it's kind of like that rebranding of global warming. When you lose, you just change the name and win, right? I mean, we change the weather 4 times a year, so that's easy enough. And but everybody knows when you're asking someone from Florida how's the weather, you're just hoping they had a hurricane. Come on, you are a sadist.
I know.
Yeah, you were right on time.
Every time Sadgie says, "Oh, it got a little cold today," I'm like, "Really, dude? Really?"
It was like 62. I almost froze.
Yeah.
Yeah, I had to put on a jacket. It was terrible.
Yeah, but to be fair, Florida still, what's the humidity? 130%? You have to like literally have gills like a fish to live there. I don't know. That's hard for me.
And it's impossible to just go hiking through the woods unless you're on a already cut trail because the woods are so thick. It's like a wall of green. There is no you have to walk like you're the Neo in the Matrix to get through stuff.
Or literally Ponce de Leon in Florida. If you think about how crazy it was that they were looking for the Fountain of Youth in Florida, right? I mean, the Arcadians went there with the help of Celtic Viking myths that told them that in that area they'd find these springs, and whatever came of it, that's where L. Ron Hubbard built or wanted to build originally the Clear Channel or Clearwater, right? And that's the Scientologist headquarters now, is the Fountain of Youth zone, and it's very close to Coral Castle, which is the crazy structure built by this 5-foot tall Slovenian man, made out of stones larger than the pyramids of. Good call. Wow, who does that? Who would call me in the middle of my show?
I mean, right? Who does that?
That fits right in with our way of doing things.
We have a call we have a guest call on the show asking relationship advice. No, this is not that kind of show. Yeah, so Ponce de Leon in Florida. And then, last one is Cyrus Teed. He did the hollow earth theory out of that area of Florida as a Fountain of Youth. And his thought was, we're living in a dream lie. We're inside of the earth, inside out reality, and that the center is this black hole that's sucking everything into it, a black sun. But that we're looking.
Oh, that's where they got the song from, Black Hole Sun.
I would hope so. And I hope it washes away the rain someday.
Yeah. Yeah, so no, go ahead, man.
Well, I could spiel all day, but I wasn't sure. Do you guys want to, how are you? Like, how's it going this evening? What have you guys been looking into?
Well, I mean, first of all, honestly, I want to tell you how I found your channel was when I first heard about Tartaria. I'm like, Tartaria? What's Tartaria? And I think it might have been a John Levy. I think it was John Levy was the first thing that popped up on my screen, and somehow once I watched one or two of his videos, one of your videos was recommended by YouTube. I'm not 100% sure it was.
I do love John Levy. He's a good man.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I was going to interrupt Saji for a second.
Go ahead.
Didn't Lone Eagle start doing videos on those a long time ago? Tartaria?
A little bit. He got into the whole Starfort part of it.
Okay.
But anyway, I'm not 100% sure it was him, but it was a channel like his. And anyway, so I found your channel, but then I found the other thing I find the other thing I really enjoy most about your channel, besides the information that you're presenting, is your style, the creative flair, the way you do the video editing, and you find a way, even when you're doing an interview, to put imagery that goes along with what's being said. And you have a knack for finding just the right image that goes with whatever the conversation may be at the time. I mean, even when I watched your interview with the guy who created the Echo the Dolphin game, while you were conducting that interview, the images that you brought up on the screen while he was talking, it just set this, it puts together a whole surreal vibe that is just fun to watch. And I think that, and it's got like a how do I say, like a creative flair that is rare. I mean, it's like it's your unique style, your unique I don't know, your unique way of putting it all together that I just find really fascinating, and I just really enjoy it. I have a hard time finding the right words sometimes, but I think I'm getting the overall message across. And I say all of that to say this: you must have at least some background in computer graphics and things of that nature, and then also you have a lot of historical knowledge, and almost like on a level of being like some type of university. But I'm inclined to think that most of it is self-taught. So I really just kind of want to pick your brain and find out how you got into all of this, and what motivates you. I know that's a lot, but I mean, I really would just like to hear basically, how you got started.
Thank you. That's awesome. Is my microphone working? Can you hear me?
Yeah, we
Yep,
hear
we
you
got
now.
you
Great.
now.
I love that you chose that video. So half of that's true. I guess that I did in 2008 or 7. I guess that was 2007 when I made that first video you showed. I was doing video mixing for bands a lot. And so I did go to school. I did go around the world. I'm kind of the poor man's hipster rendition of Indiana Jones in that way, like the Young Indiana Jones Chronicles. I got to visit all over Austria and Europe before 2001. And I feel like that's like before World War I in a lot of ways, because the world has changed so much from a time when you would go on the street corner and trade shillings for francs. The entire world's different since 2001. So I'm very lucky that I'm just old enough to have been taken by my parents as a child to see the world before it changed. And also the internet has changed everything. And I was lucky to have language courses and to be kept kind of in Santa Cruz, which is, I've always considered like the Chernobyl before the explosion, the futurist city in so many ways. It became Silicon Valley. We were isolated, and in some ways. And it's why there's so many hippies, hipsters, transhumanists, transgenderisms, it's everything that's happening in California. We're kind of one of the forefront places for that. And also, ironically, where the California conservative movement is so strong. And so I was surrounded with all those things, and I went to school. I was trying to get through to impress my parents and to do the right thing. So I focused on engineering and on meta tagging software. I was learning about in the background about neural nets and artificial intelligence. And then I was kind of getting interested in open cognition. And so that led me to open free software. And because of that, the transition from university life, and also this is another thing, it's expensive to go to school. So the best way is to avoid paying for school. You do these programs, the BOG, I think it was called, the UTAG, these things that they give you free education, and you take as many community college classes as possible. I also graduated from high school when I was 16 by taking college courses at community colleges, including theater, because you can take any kind of class. So I took English and lit and math and science, but I also took a fluff course or two to begin with, just to get myself into, I think I took Java computer programming in junior high, and that got me into the community college system. And then I got interested, and when I was finished, I just kept hanging out at the community college. I was excited to see people liked being in school, who wanted to be there, because that's not what high school was like. And they eventually made me a student senator because I became politically involved with the school, and I started helping with these programs for finances and for social activities funds, and making sure I was trying to gear the school towards printing its own books, taking the money that we were using to pay for kids who couldn't afford these books and giving that money to McGraw-Hill. Take that money from the Rockefellers and just give it to teachers to write open source alternatives, open educational resources. So we started getting OER programs started, and I made a bunch of videos about that, and got the schools financed by the Packard Foundation and et cetera. But, and also I was interested in movies, and I was making movies. I was making like short films in school, and I was taking a video art class. But I think it was maybe before that, when I was 14, 15, I went to a friend's house that had a party, and it was the Paul Sweet house, which is this guy who was a whaler in California. He used to drag pedophiles on horseback around in circles because they wouldn't be arrested. And there was a grave next to the graveyard. In other words, his grave isn't in the graveyard, and it's a cross that's been carved, fallen down. So there's a lot of weird things to wonder about this guy who married a teenage Indian and what the deal with Paul Sweet was in his haunted house. But the house was definitely haunted, and it was a very old, one of the oldest houses in California that had survived earthquakes in centuries. And we would have these giant parties there, and they said, we need somebody who can mix video. And I had some experience with software, but I hadn't really done this yet. And I started saying, what if I take the Weather Channel style of, you have a guy, and you got a background. Instead, we'll switch it. We'll just take two videos and we'll merge them on top of each other by keying out colors and light and background. And so I started doing a lot of these transition videos. And so I would go, that took me everywhere. I was at Burning Man. I was, at Pixar parties doing the videos for the background of these people. The first one that really mattered was this Pixar party. And a guy gave me a projector that had probably been $10,000 5 years ago, when it came out. But they just switched through them all the time. And I had to get a new light bulb for it for like $300. But then I had my own projector. So then I could start doing video projections all over the place. I started volunteering with NASA. And that led me to Yuri's Night, which is the cosmonaut Yuri. There was a night every year about when he went to space that was celebrated by NASA. And they'd have a festival, a rave, essentially NASA's rave. And so I'd project videos for that. And I was just getting more and more involved with video art. But at the same time, I was going to school to do other things. So I ended up getting engineering, nanotechnology, going to do a program at Stanford where I was working with the atomic force microscope, and through discovery internship by Foothill at NASA, I was able to do more stoichiometric indexing, which is how you tell the difference. You look at a scanning electron microscope, will look at a material, and an ATM will also look at a material, and you can tell the shape of it and then also the material of it. So the SEM will tell you how it's designed, what it's made of, how it looks like. But the ATM, the AFM will tell you, the atomic force microscope will tell you this much material is this in the middle of it, or it's iron, or there's some aluminum, or how it's stacked. So you can reverse engineer, but you could also reverse engineer nature. You could get into biomimicry. So I was really fascinated with this, and also continued to work on neural nets and background software. And I was getting bored with running a SEM, by just running a piece of equipment to index materials was interesting at first, but there's just nothing you want to do for the rest of your life. So I got a job at CNN, which, as far as I realized, was like the CIA, because it was a Mockingbird news agency that completely was trying to
Makes sense.
Yeah, I didn't know it at the time because, at the time I hadn't really watched TV that much, and I was mostly into YouTube and internet things. And so I thought this would impress my parents that I got a prestigious job for a well-known business. And so I went down there and told them I can help them with meta tags and social media. And immediately I realized what CNN was this giant outlet for, and this is also because I was like 19 at the time. I hadn't read all these books about Mockingbird, or didn't understand yet Anderson Cooper's connection to how these things really were built. And so it really pivoted my whole life in a lot of ways. And I wouldn't have ever said I was a conspiracy theorist or anything. I really still think I'm not, but it's really difficult when you're in journalism. And I think the big example was Flight 370, that I realized that there's a bunch of information that's not being shared for a few reasons. And there's a natural reason, which is they can't prove certain things they could get sued for. They're not going to talk about them. But that's just so much of an excuse. There's definitely a push to make these narratives that will distract from whatever's going on that we do know about. Flight 370, the first week I'm there, I find out that they're going to, there's the Freescale Semiconductor company is going to have new patents for UAV and self-driving cars. But the company that they worked with to do it was out of Malaysia. and about 100 and some odd people, maybe 160 people on the plane, were patent holders for this UAV self-driving car technology. And so so at the first day, they're like, what do you want to put? And I'm like, maybe we should put, because you're doing the tweets. And I'm like, maybe we should put, what happened to Freescale's employees on Flight 370? What will happen to these patents, to their self-driving car patent? They're like, no, we don't want to go there. That could really, let's just put, was a mental illness behind Flight 370 going missing.
Wow.
And I was like, okay, sure, boss, but I knew it was a bad idea. And the other thing was, I explained earlier, and I'd have to fly and talk to people at Turner about how this works for HLN, CNN, a couple companies, that the internet is no longer just this fringe thing, and TV now is. And so this idea that half of TV stations is over, and now you're just 1 or 2 or 100, doesn't matter, channels of millions of infinitely growing channels. And and the other major difference is your audience are now channels themselves, they're users themselves. So everything about it has to change. And I was really still positive at that time that they could figure it out and that it could be beneficial. But instead, they sold Flipboard, they shut down a lot of their program. And you saw CNN in 2015, it just disintegrated before everything. I mean, they got rid of everybody.
Yeah,
but I left and went to South America and just was like, okay, I can't. At first, they got me doing Coachella things really quickly for a little while. And I just called them from a hot tub in San Diego. I was like, I've got a better thing in Chile. I'm just going to leave. And so I did.
Wow. That everything you just said, that is a lot to process. And how old are you when you're in the hot tub telling them farewell?
Whoa, gosh, what was this? 2015. So I was 26.
Okay. So you were it would be safe to say that you had fully you had came full circle in as far as like you're a full-fledged young adult male ready to take on the world.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't know that I was kind of worried about it, but I figured I could speak enough Spanish, and Chile was the country that didn't require a visa to go to. And I had a friend who was working at a hostel. And so I figured I'll just go and see what I can do. Maybe I can make online journalism or something else. I was honestly thinking about doing a documentary on street dogs and just how they don't have pounds in some of these parts of South America, and how amazing it is, because these dogs, they stop at stoplights and they look both ways. And if there's somebody drunk, they'll walk that drunk person home, and then they'll say, hey, don't worry, I'll see you tomorrow. I got some stuff to do. But then they look for you later. Like, dogs are far brighter in South America. So I wanted to do something like that. But as I got down there, as soon as I got to the hostel where my friend was working, he'd already quit. And it took me like 3 weeks to get down there. And he left like the night before I got there or something, and flew to the other side of the continent, to Argentina. So then I had to get around for like a few months. And that started me off on Tartaria in a lot of ways, because I'd already been around the world and I'd already known about lost civilizations, and my family had been interested in these things. My mom is very literary. So she had books like Fleming's Tales of Tartary, and I understood the connections between Tartary and Tartarus and Columbus and Marco Polo, right? Because they all talk about Tartary. And there's this other subtlety, which is they always tell you they're talking about India or China now, but then you say, wait. In the book, it doesn't say that. In the book, it says Tartary. Why? And they say, oh, well, that's just this, at that time in that place, they called it that. Well, that's crazy. I
Googled Tartaria before you came on, because I wanted to make sure we spelled it right for the hashtag, and Google auto-corrected me to Tartary.
Well, see, the other irony is that there's nobody who can be sure that we're spelling it right. I've been arguing with myself about this for a long time. Is it Dada instead of Tartar, right? That's what the Persians would have called it, because they don't pronounce the R's. The R's were accents. And this other idea that T and D and D and Th and T, like, these are all possible sounds. It could have been Tharthar, or probably Tha, like thar, like Thoth, Tahuli. And then, but Thoth was probably not the TH sound at the time because that's what Barcelonans do. That was brought later. Although I've been recently hearing people argue that there's a reason for that has to do with the Moorish Castiles and why that when they came through that there was this lisp, but the lisp might not have been just a imperfection of this child. The way Spaniards describe it is that this princess was with a lisp, and so they forced their people to speak that way, and that's why the accent Barcelona and the C sounds has become this way. Well, I mean, there could be evidence to the contrary that it's because her family had married family that the accent came from the Castiles. So we don't know for sure. That's not really the most essential part.
That's not something to get hung up on. But the point I guess I was trying to make in that regard was that you can't even look up the name of it without getting auto corrected by Google.
Absolutely. But that in a weird way helps us because now you can say, okay, well, Berbers are Tartars, Barbars are Tartars. This idea of non-Roman becomes Tartarian, and pathologically, the way it was looked at, that Tartaria was looked at 100 years ago, 200 years ago, and 500 years ago. It's this idea that further west, further east, you'll get to Tartary, and that the world is kind of wrapped in this empire or this fantasy world. It changes. At some point it becomes a fantasy. It becomes impossible to believe. It's not a fantasy to everybody who's close to the remnants of the empire. For instance, in Tatarstan today, people still know about it. Recently, there's this show from Ukraine starring Zelensky, the president of Ukraine. Before he was a president, you look up on his Wikipedia, it says, a comedian and now president of Ukraine. The show called Servant of the People. And where
he played the president of Ukraine, correct?
Oh, absolutely. I mean,
yeah.
You can see why our shows are getting so bad because the best people are working on this mind control program. But it's amazing what they did. And it honestly would almost make you cry a couple times. It's like, shut up and take my money, you brilliant people. Because they've created this guy who fights corruption, and they show him working out on the side of the show sometimes. And I finally watched all of the episodes and really understood how they took over the country through this show. And it even ends right before COVID in 2019 with them talking about they need a new a metaphorical inoculation for psychological social engineering because people have become immune to all the political science vaccinations. It's like the last lines in the show. So it's really interesting that they set up that show. But in it, they talk about the Tartars, and it comes up all the time because the area in Georgia and in Ukraine where Khazaria, and all these things that are associated with the Caliphate, the Cordoba Caliphate and the Umayyad Caliphate that are associated with Tatarstan and Tartaria, that's the epicenter. That's where most of the records we still have that point this out are. That's maybe where Marco Polo really went through it first. And we know that Marco Polo said he didn't see the Great Wall, or rather, he didn't say that he did see the Great Wall, but use that as a way to see what he did see. I mean, most people will tell you then he just didn't go to China. Well, go further with that. He saw the infrastructure of this great civilization that had spread so far that he never even needed to get to the Great Wall to see that empire. That's how big this was. And as time went on, it dwindled. You could say the Jesuits, after the Pax Mongola, show up in the 1500s, and they start to reduce the size of Tartaria. They start to say, this area is Manchuria now. And really, they say, well, it always was Manchuria, but that we just simply didn't understand that these were different people. Well, look at how we start breaking up nation states. And this is the same thing. This is what happened in the 20th century with Rhodesia, with places in Africa, with the 19th century, even with Cecil Rhodes trying to build a number of states that broke up nations but were useful for corporations. This is what happened to ports in what we call today China. And at that point, there's 300 ethnicities. Now, even there technically are supposed to be 300 ethnicities. 52 languages, though, are left that are spoken in some respect, or at least remembered in China. And so that
All
you
right.
clearly have a just complete erasure of the culture.
Now, one thing I see, like it seems like no matter what person you're following, there's different. I feel like Tartaria kind of gets the same rep as like you could say flat Earth or the Mandela effect, or a lot of these things where there really isn't an easy way to prove it to an average person on a way that they can comprehend one way or the other. And
What do you mean by that? Could you elaborate?
yeah, like for instance, like if you wanted to try, I mean, like you'll see people debating flat Earth, get consumed by it and have a slightly different variation of the concept of the model and bicker over the technicalities of it, even more so than they're arguing with whether or not it's flat. I mean, and then in the Mandela effect community, sometimes you have segments of people not even agreeing on exactly what a Mandela effect is, and then other things, and so like it makes it almost like it. And then when you get into Tartaria, you have different versions and narratives of it. But one thing that I've seen as a common thread is almost all of everybody who explores it somehow, some way, Genghis Khan comes into the picture or is brought up and or is mentioned. And then when I try to imagine Tartaria or fascinate about it or whatever, and I picture it in my mind based on the information I have, it seems like it's a more tech, like it doesn't sound to me. I don't picture Genghis Khan type of a civilization where everyone's um like kind of savage and brutal and barbaric, but more sophisticated and noble and very aristocratic and a lot of heritage and sophistication. That's where I find the conflict, because when you hear stories about Genghis Khan, it always sounds so savage and barbaric and brutal. But when I imagine Tartaria, I imagine a much more sophisticated society. Am I off
Right.
balance here?
No, so that's an interesting, and this is again how interesting I think racism is, that it exists at all, because it has a lot to do with nomadic nations and states. If you look at places where they don't have the same resource definitions, racism doesn't work the same way. You go to, Bali or parts of the Polynesian islands where they have ghost wars. These people will literally fight against each other once a year in order to appease the ghosts that will otherwise cause famines. As soon as one person falls, that's fine. It just has to appease the sacrifice. But they don't have this concept of hyper negative racism or the idea that they're nationalistically better than the other. Poland was completely against the Tartars, and you'll see it in these movies like Taurus Bulba, Genghis Khan, the Tartar princess from the 50s and 60s. They start to talk about Tartaria, interestingly enough, also tied with the CIA, because if you look up Tartary from before anything, one of the first things that came up for the US, it was the CIA trying to use Tartarian history to inspire nationalism in the Soviet Union, and in order to try to break up states in the Soviet Union and make them feel like they were different than the Soviets because they were descendants of the Tartars. So the thing was that even in mascots, you look at the Detroit Tartar field, the Tartars are represented as these Fu Manchu, mustached. I mean, I get why they're getting rid of some of these caricatures from sports. It's kind of a sad thing, though, because we're losing some of that history when we can go back and analyze it more. For the Khans were not that terrible the way that we're told that they were. I mean, they are terrible in a different way. They were iconoclastic. And so what happened was you have a generation that burns down villages and comes into cities and says, everyone leave the city and we'll burn it down, or stay in the city and we'll burn it down, because we're anti-city now. And this is a number of stories about tearing the barbarians tearing down the aqueducts 10 miles out of town so that the water stops flowing, right? Destroying infrastructure. So there is this idea that there was an infrastructural collapse in Tartaria. And you have to imagine living in Singapore or New York City or some amazing place that's got internet, and then the next week and then the next 20 years after losing water and power, the entire city would be very different. I mean, Rome lost 90% of its citizens without water, right? In this particular example. And we look at other possible technological achievements of Tartaria through, I'm all about the historicity. If you look at the Arabic books, if you look at the Byzantine transition of porters, where the Irish traders went to the ports of Constantinople and Istanbul and brought the data through Ireland to Italy, where the Renaissance began, you start to see all sorts of examples of this. And again, people will argue ideologically. I agree with you. They'll argue ideologically, but I think I kind of win in terms of historicity, because I can go back, except for in certain circumstances with Mandela effect. I mean, granted, people will always think that I'm wrong. And I really do appreciate the Mandela effect community. But looking at the books we have right now that I've seen in my lifetime, Thomas Knoll's Knoll Codex shows, and if you look up Tales from the East, I think is in the Knoll Codex, is what they're calling it. But if you read the actual thing, it says Tartary. It doesn't say East, right? And the same with there's so many books that are all about the experiences of Gnostics in the 8th century that went to Tartary. These stories of manumissions, these stories of being associated with this trade network that they were working for. And it doesn't appear again for a few centuries in England, and in France and in several places. So you realize that this means there was a break from the time when they had the most power and that they controlled the world, and that these people were happy to be servants to this high power empire that would give them more, right? They were apprentices essentially, and their children were given better deals, and they were also given a retirement plan. So this is a kind of serfdom that existed, but you also have people that are pretty sick of that. And when nepotism and cronyism continue on, eventually there is likely nobody there to save the system, or the person who could will steal it. So that's when the cons become important. And the cons are typically known for grabbing culture from different places. They're on nomadic vehicles, and they're bringing everything with them where they go. And so you look at the steppes of Kazan versus the steppes in Mongolia, where they believe the Khan seat the throne was kept. The difference is Kazan is still this giant city with beautiful Tartarian architecture, and they have their flag of Kazan is a dragon feathered bird thing. That's clearly the closest thing to what, since December 2021, when they finally admitted that birds were theropods and branches of what they describe literally as dinosaur. In other words, dinosaur has been rebranded as well to deal with the fact that we're just giant birds. But I digress. You can see that Khan did not live in the capital. He lived in his own outpost out in the middle of this field. It was a big flat land, and you could ride in, you could bring all your stuff, and he set up a camp. And that way it was always brand new, because the tents could be replaced when they got dirty. So he didn't live in the cities that were dilapidating. And that happened for 200 or 300 years. And after that, then all of a sudden, that's when they start taking over Tartaria, and they say, oh yeah, well, these guys, they're just nomads and they live in the mud. And even leads on to Albert Pike. Albert Pike says, oh, well, the Tartars, they lost their inheritance because they didn't know how to use it right.
So I guess then my next question, and I'm pretty much following you here. I mean, you're a little bit over my head, but I'm not completely underwater. But I guess if I'm assuming I'm an audience member and I'm listening to this, and one of the things that I know comes up to somebody who's new to the whole Tartarian concept in general is, okay, so let's assume, let's go ahead and say, yeah, the history is being suppressed or it's missing. And which is it a nefarious plot to keep it hidden from us, or is it just something that got lost happenstancely?
Two levels. One, there clearly is a plot to steal the legacy of Tartaria. A number of nations today and states today claim heir to this nation openly. You saw Alexander Dugin on my podcast. Russia believes themselves to be the literal heir of Tartaria. Zelensky has said similar things about Ukraine, and Crimea has been, one of the arguments about trying to reclaim Crimea from both sides. How this conflict started in Crimea, beyond just nationalism in the Donetsk, there literally is an area there that is the closest thing that we have to a thriving Tartar culture still. So these things are definitely hidden on purpose. But a lot of people don't know that, and they hide it with it. I mean, imagine how many teachers did you have that believed everything that they were taught, and they weren't trying to be terrible teachers to you, and they just literally believed what they were taught. I remember teachers thinking Marco Polo actually got to New York City in 1492, essentially, and that was the first time, and not even thinking about the Viking runestones, which we've now proven, lasers have proven that these are real Viking runestones. We know that there are Viking runestones in Minnesota. So the Great Lake system, we can even tell you when it happened beyond a doubt from looking at the reservoir levels, when these lakes were connected enough that they could have gone through the Hudson, through the Canada Straits into Minnesota, into the Great Lakes. So we know that this is 1,000 years or 500 years rather earlier. But also, we have to deal with the fact that everyone wants to believe the correct narrative. I mean, imagine how horrible it would be to be a teacher and find out that you were wrong. So they just continue pushing this and making students believe these things. The problem is none of that's going to work anymore. Everything's changed. Genetic information, data is coming out. And so data will prove we have lasers that can see things humans cannot. We have radio that can scope things that humans cannot. We can anticipate the actual degradation of material is not constant. So we know also from volcanology that these ideas that years or just millions and millions of years ago are really just occasional spikes of an eruption that happened at some point. And they could have been millions of years ago unless they were nuclear. And now we know that there are nuclear volcanoes like Oklo in Gabon. And, Oklo is a great example of 16 natural nuclear reactors. And these are all Wikipedia. This is not counterculture stuff. I mean, this is all what is socially acceptable, but just hasn't been reread yet. So people have not really realized they're pushing the dates back. They're starting to fold everything back, and they're starting to show things for what they really were. The problem is that it's ideologically difficult. And I think that was your first real question. Well, is the thing that's hardest to deal with is the ideological question and debate. The idea that we are the highest hill, that we are Atlantis. And this is really, people believe beyond that there was a Tartaria, mainstream believes this is Atlantis, that we are this anomaly in the world, in the universe, in the meaning of existence that are the best that has ever happened. And completely dismiss the idea that there was a higher culture than us in whatever way, because it could have been that they weren't like us, but better. But this is something that's where the argument becomes more important to look into actual data. But just the idea that there could have been a high culture before is startling to people. Even Graham Hancock has to say it was 12,000 years ago. He can't handle the idea that this was recently lost, because it makes you lose sleep at night to wonder about millions or billions of dead people that were their lives were cut short, that their quality of life was depleted. I mean, the amount of suffering that we hear about in history that happened after this, it just goes to show how crazy it is. So that's a hard thing for people to accept. I get that.
I tell you one thing that was the most convincing for me, because a lot of times you kind of have to. Sometimes the hardest part is convincing yourself. At least that's how it works for me. Like, I'm a skeptic by nature, but when I first discovered the whole flat Earth concept, long before I was familiar with the Tartaria concept, I found a website that shows historical maps going all the way back to the 1400s, and then you have the 1500s, and then the 1600s. There's like a gap right there at the year 1600. It's hard to find a historical map right at that year. It's like or in that time frame. Then you get into all the way almost up until like 1720 is when you start seeing any type of real advanced cartography, and then all of a sudden there's still a lot of truth in those maps. But then you get into the 1800, and it's like everything is different now. Like all the mysticism is gone. All Antarctica is totally different. The islands that once existed don't exist anymore. The North Pole has been changed. I mean, all of that stuff. And that's where I realized, that's where I became convinced that there is history that is lost. Like there is something missing. There's a gap. And to me, it seems like it's right around the year between 16 and 1700. Am I warm? Are you guessing in that same range? You're muted up.
Oh, crazy. Well, there's a number of connections there. For instance, in 1666, there's the Fire of London. It's also the beginning of King James the Sixth of Scotland and First of England, and the Masonry. You know, Shakespeare invented Masonry kind of thing here, right? Where we say that this new creation that was probably De Vere and Bacon and Cecil and John Dee started putting out this new culture. And when I say new culture, you know, Shakespeare invented 500 new words. They completely diverted Anglo-Frisian culture. And it's one thing to talk about the maps, because at that time, map making was a very important skill. So this idea that they just were terrible at map making is absurd. And you look at people like Jacques Cartier, who went to Stadacona and was around in the country of Canada along the St. Lawrence River and all of the Gulf of St. Lawrence, and saw all these and put these perfect maps. And the way he does it with the tools of masonry, right? You have these compass angles and this light sight, and you take a boat certain hours through the day and you map it, and you're able to do this coastline, and it's amazing, really. Map making is amazing. So this idea that they didn't know how to do it is just, it's a lie. And the maps, what they show are different land masses, right? This is that idea of the Kelowna, the turtle island idea, or the whale island. That there's living land masses that are moving. We later describe as tectonic plates shifting or whatever we want, but that there's literally Frisia disappears, for instance, and now there's an entire group of people in the Netherlands that speak Frisian.
Yeah, that's the island that I was trying to mention. I couldn't think of the name of it.
Oh, there's so many hidden islands or disappeared islands, or phantom, as they say in the West, phantom islands. In other words, we were just wrong. There never was an island there. There happened to be a culture. There's this, not just a map of an island, but a map of the cities upon the island.
Nothing missing here. Just keep on moving. Yeah.
Right. And yet there's also the interest of, these are areas in the sea that are so far north that they get into difficult to reach zones around Greenland, and the military could be watching, but they allow certain volcanic mining companies to use. And so this is another example where places that are megalithic underwater have been found a number of times. There's thousands of examples, but so many of them have also been destroyed because there's not a lot of oversight, and there's an intentional destruction of these places. Sometimes just for resources. Sometimes you could pretend it's negligence. I mean, the 1700s into the 19th century, sponge collecting was a major cover for so many things, for looting pirate ships and for finding megaliths and ruins and taking whatever you could from them. But so many of them are pushed around, and this idea that Blavatsky had of Lemuria, an island in Old Zealand, near New Zealand, that was very large and connected with perhaps even Madagascar. But that would also say how long ago it was, because Malaysia and Madagascar have very independent flora and fauna that have maybe we again say these are like 130 million years old. It's not likely that old. It's probably more like within the last 20,000 to 10,000 years. And even beyond that, it's interesting how fast things can happen, because we look at Bovatoya and these volcanoes that are putting out, they can build an island from a volcano. Like a flume will just release enough material that you can literally, it's like Minecraft. You just end up with these islands all over the South Pacific. Fiji, we don't even know. People say we don't know how many islands are in Fiji. How is that possible? Because it changes all the time.
a lot. I mean, people have said the same thing about Hawaii, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, and it's interesting that Hawaii has literally false islands too, because you've got the richest people in the world are building their chains there, but nobody's showing you the other examples. Like Malaysia, right around where Flight 370 was Diego Garcia Island, which is a CIA rents this island from MI6 and have this whole compound down there. I mean, there are crazy examples when you get down to Malaysia. And that's supposed to be the oldest forest where we find the closest things to the old theropods. In other words, dragons that we can find. So it's an interesting thing. It's also very close to Krakatoa. And so, and really quickly, like I said, in 2021 of December, for whatever reason, so much of the work that we've been talking about has been mainstream validated. So this is another example of one, which is in Malaysia, they found these megalithic ruins that are connected to Slavic cultures. And they said that these volcanic reactors that existed in Gabon also exist in other locations, including in the South Pacific. And there's even an article, Zealand, that says, okay, this island, this lost continent that, maybe Blavatsky, but the other people talked about it too. We found with laser and LiDAR the lost continent of Zealand. And so now it's no longer called Lemuria. It's just called Zealand. So you can skip a lot of the ideological argument these days that used to exist even just months ago, because all of this stuff has just become too validated to ignore.
But it's only people who are paying attention who are realizing the validation even occurred. You've said a lot. I've been interjecting as best as I can. Armor, Hebrew, did you guys have something you wanted to chime in on in one way? Anything you want to add to this?
No, I definitely find it fascinating. But like I said, I've watched his videos and definitely fascinating. I was wondering, do you think, does this in any way, like, what do you think caused the fall of Tartaria if it was so big and civilized and powerful in its own way, for lack of a better term? And do you think it ties in any way to mud floods or anything like that?
Absolutely.
And obviously you believe it ties into the fake history, the missing years, the rewrite of our calendars and stuff, I'd imagine.
Absolutely. So I kind of think that follow the money still works to an extent. Now, you can't be completely sure about anything. What we do know is that volcanoes went off and that was something connected to the end of this civilization, because before that, we have a lot more discussion that's been completely erased. And after that, you have fantasy, myth, and legend, and also accounts of things like the Dutch East Indies Trading Company, for instance, say that they went down and saw Krakatoa go off, that there was just this small fishing village, 130,000 people died, and no big deal. But this guy had to go in a rowboat to see it, and ended up in a lighthouse that was under a tsunami for 30 days and survived. There should really be a movie. So the thing is, all these guys who were telling you that these civilizations that were hit by volcanoes were minor, that were just, simple folk, that's where I start to wonder. And those are the same people today that seem to be in charge, and they're interested in mining and submarine volcano mining facilities. Even looking at Epstein and Maxwell's Terra Mars project, the idea of mining and using energy from submarine volcanoes is huge, and it allows them this concept of building their own sovereignty, because in maritime law they're able to have their own sovereignty. If you're a ship, right, you've got your citizenship. There's a whole documentary from Ben Stewart called Ungrip that's very interesting about maritime and sea law. But the argument,
we've discussed that to some degree on here before, so that's not completely a foreign concept to either us or our audience.
Awesome. Yeah. So I think that's probably even if you're talking to your family that don't agree with you on things, you can kind of get them to recognize that there's always been this dynamic between the land and the sea powers, because the land produces the resources that are being traded by the sea they're more conservative naturally for doing this. They're conserving resources. There's certain ingenuity, but it's safe, it's tried and true. Maritime constantly has to be flexible. It's overcoming obstacles that are changing all the time. And you can predict, but you really need to be a futurist in a certain respect. So you have to be maybe not always too futurist, because you could overdo it. And so modernity is really this idea, it's a false now that's created by this futurism that's trying to augment nature. And so the sea power has somehow taken over the land power in many ways. There's been, throughout the 19th century, the entire conflict between colonialisms were that they were going to the ports that they had been trading in and taking their ports and controlling them themselves, because the land power
Is that where
lost.
the star forts come into play?
Absolutely. The star forts and the mud flood are, after this volcano, you have these eruptions that have 7 shock waves heard around the earth, and tidal waves and tsunamis. And then eventually you have, along with these shakes, you have mud that's being brought. And then there's also liquefaction. There's a huge amount that has to do with that, but also that this is a prepared and predicted event. And these city states that we consider, is this was this Atlantis? Was that Atlantis? These are all colonies that were sovereign. They had their own governors. They had their own energy sources. And these are these snowflake shaped star forts. And we find them in Russia. We find them in Hawaii. We find them in, California, Peru. We find them in Europe. We find them across Eurasia and in Africa too. And now we're finding more. See, because shout out to 13th Monkey for doing the best work ever on finding star forts. Now LiDAR is changing the world, because there are drones that are flying all over the place, and they're picking up on things that were never seen before in Canada, in Brazil. Now that they've removed so much of the rainforest, tragically, the benefit is they're able to find star forts that are in the middle of the rainforest. Canada, there's a great guy, Dr. Jonathan Fowler, who is doing work on the Fort Anne and several other forts that are all about 20 to 50 miles in radius, some of them. And so 20 miles is pretty impressive. There are some 2-mile and some even smaller forts that are these centric forts that look like they've been rebuilt in the 1700s or the 1800s, but they're on top of these larger settlements that are about the size of the description of Atlantis. And the same for Mauritania and in Spain. They're all kind of similar. You go to the Netherlands and they're still lived in, but in South America, it's true too. Like in Peru, they have a complete, the Lima Star Fort is still used by the military, and a lot of forts are. So
and
Star
what would
Forts,
you say the primary purpose of the star fort was? I mean, I would assume that there's some type of military, defensive, strategic by their design. But
there
then
are
you can also, I
there's
can
some
also
that were.
go ahead. But I was going to say also, I can also see something like some sacred geometry or something spiritual about it as well, almost to a point where like some type of astro traveling thing may be occurring, where you can teleport from one to the other, maybe not in a physical sense, but in a conscious kind of way, where
And
you can.
I love that would freak people out if you said it that way. But if you said that those were just Zoom conference rooms, that it would be completely normal to people.
Exactly.
They
So
had,
what's your take on all of that? I mean, do you think it was more military, defensive, strategic, or a combination of both? I mean, what's your best working theory?
So I think the sacred geometrical shapes can't be ignored. And this idea that they were just perfect for military defense, well, it's true that in circumstances, perfectly 360 degrees, 33 rose degrees will allow you to defend yourself. But not all of them are symmetrically perfect shapes that way. In fact, a lot of them are a golden ratio. What they all have in common is they're connected to rivers, or they were at the time connected to streams of some kind that are going around them. And so you see this curve of nature that's being used to filter water, allowing for current to be used, which is, Cordoba, for instance, in Spain, and in Cordoba in Argentina. You'll see these river systems where, but in Spain today, still they have these giant water mills that they were using. And they say when people came to Cordoba in the 1100s or whatever, that during Muslim times that they had lights still, and everything was still there was still electricity being used from the currents. So there's a lot of evidence that this was an all-in-one system. It had a community. It was autonomous. It could defend itself, but really more, it could defend itself from nature, right? Because if water hits you from all sides, if mud hits you from all sides, it can waves will bounce off the walls and go the other direction, and the walls will actually push into each other to reinforce its own shape. So it's a really smart thing to have for nature, but it's just also just so useful for harvesting energy.
Yeah, so it's multi-purpose.
Absolutely. I think that you could use a star fort for the harmonization idea as well, because if you look at the fact that there's so many cathedrals, the word that defines a city has to do with having a cathedral, but not necessarily like a mosque or a cathedral, but this certain kind of building that they're all built out of. That, Royal Rife, maybe you've heard of, right? He talks about energy, sound healing, but now we're using sound healing to sonicate gallstones. Like there's a lot of use for sonication, and the military use it to blow up bridges, like they use a sonic boom, sonic blast. So there is evidence that they were using these buildings and these cathedrals in order to harmonize specific sounds, which would, at least it was believed at that time, and it's starting to be believed again now, or at least recognized through data, that these sounds could heal you or help you divert tumoric growth or mutinying consciousness, right? As the Chinese medicine shows us today, it looks like they believe that cancer was some sort of a consciousness that was mutinying against the rest of your body, because you were going through suffering or something. Part of you decides to just break off from yourself. So to keep yourself in harmony with these bells and these gongs, and this has also made its way to Peru, which in Peru there's lots of Chinese medicine that is older than the Chinese medicine that's still in mainland China. It's closer to the Taiwan style, but it's from maybe the 1600s when they got there. So we're seeing more examples of sound healing.
All right, I can get with that, and I mean I can see how the sound they could almost be designed that way. I mean, the next closest thing that I can compare it to that my brain connects it to would be almost like a because it's universal no matter which continent it's on. That's a similar design or pattern, even though some of them are unique, or most of them even have some form of uniqueness to them. There's enough similarity that you can distinguish it as quote unquote a star fort. The same thing could be said for like the crop circle phenomenon, where like I would have to imagine that there's some type of sonic technology involved in their creation as well, more so than a bunch of aliens, little green guys jumping out of a UFO with sickles and laying the corn down just right, but I mean, I kind of digress there. I'm being a little bit facetious, but the point I'm trying to make with all of this is I'm hip with I'm really down with the sonic theory, because it does seem like that would apply, and I can also see how it may have some type of religious sentiment as well, but I don't know enough about it to try to to base an argument on that, but there's something spiritual or religious involved in it as well.
Absolutely. So if you think about the Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris, the windows are these solfeggio frequencies in chimera form, or chromatic, not chimera, but chromatic form. So you see the geometric shape presented that you could create if you had like a subwoofer with some flour or some powder on it. It will make the shape of the resonant tone. So we're able to actually look at those windows and make those tones and say, yes, these actually were the maps for which tones to play in this building and which frequencies to have your organ tuned to. And if it makes these shapes, then you know you're hitting the right tones. We also know that the Tartarians were, I have made interviews with the Tartarstani descendants who still carry on as much as they can the religion, and they show that their grandparents and great grandparents considered themselves to be Muslim, and these are blonde, blue-eyed people in Tartarstan for the most part. So it's interesting because you say, oh well, I thought Islam was a very specific thing, and also that it was rather new if you think about it. But accordingly, it seems that Islam goes back beyond Muhammad, was beyond the religion. In fact, maybe existed before the religion as a term. The word Islam itself, at least, existed before the Quran, and that it was associated more with something like yoga, and that it was used by a people that were more Vedic in a sense, or Indo-Aryan. The idea that they had multiple gods, perhaps, or even rather there was a trinity, but that spirits and daimons were recognized, angels and demons in the Book of Enoch characters were recognized, but that it was not really a religion in the same way, because religion, the way we understand it, seems to be very reconnecting you, as opposed to yoga, which is this idea that you are already in connection. So there were already going to these buildings that were healing them and understanding them to be technology, and that might have changed the way they looked at faith, right? And it might change ours as well if we start saying that some of this stuff isn't just power of suggestion, but it's literal physics. When we start to recognize that, it's going to change our definitions of faith as well. We probably will have to change the word religion. So many people think religion means something with a negative connotation. So I think religion
that goes back to the argument of your vocabulary controls your thoughts, because if there's not a word for it, you can't think it.
Right. Or rather, if there is a word for it, you think it in that word.
Exactly.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I'm not sure what's better. If you think about the official narrative, Havelock says that Hellenistic philosophy advanced the human consciousness by opening up pathways, creating synapses that made it possible by using new kinds of words to create new kinds of ideology, which led to philosophy. And before that, humans were more simple. And also, we look at these examples. I mean, this is not necessarily true, by the way, but this is the Havelockian story. The others, we have these examples of wolf children, where they're not raised by people, and so parts of their brain don't develop, and they're unable to think in cognitive terms and have these philosophical ideas. So it's very quick to erase this magical thing that is this wet wiring of programming on the human civilization that makes us special. And it seems also very easy to augment, because if these children are being raised by these machines all day and they're learning how to use chat and emoji and web videos, and soon we'll have neural link and be able to share actual experiences, what's going to happen is language will change. We're going to lose words and start to have actual experiences to replace the words, or we're going to have new meta tags to define these experiences. So it's going to be a very strange future, regardless what happens to language. But I definitely
do you think AI? Where do you think the gap bridges? Where AI stops becoming more human, and humans start becoming more AI?
Oh, that's already been going on for 50, 60 years, right? I mean, so we're augmenting our training. There was a time when we called computers the guy on the boat in the sea world who calculated the cannonball wind trajectory and how to get the right angle, right? So that became computers. We use now these record logarithm systems ever since the Rasmussen times. It doesn't change AI nearly as much. I mean, it changes us more. AI is going to eventually become part of us. It's just a question
of how it already is.
Yeah, it's a question of how much people will become post-human. This idea of transhumanism is different than post-humanism. I've noticed it misused a lot, and I try to make the distinction, not because I'm super pro transhumanist, but I've just talked to them also, and I've seen what they mean. A transhumanist will tell you that I want to get rid of Alzheimer's. A post-human will tell you, I want humans to evolve into something that can never forget anything, and is the singularity, right? So once you leave humanity, it's post-humanism, which is pretty obvious. But transhumanism really just means to extend the human condition as far as it can go and still be human. And so it's an interesting misuse, because everyone says they're against transhumanism. They're missing the idea of being a cyborg who literally just takes aspirin or takes antibiotics. You're a cyborg, right?
Yeah,
so
true. Never thought of it that way.
And if a kid has no hand and you give him a new hand, right, that's transhumanism. So there are certain aspects of that which they've kind of made us afraid of. But also think of the word transhumans, which is
Would that also
migration.
work if you got the jab, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And but at a certain point, doesn't it become post-human when you're no longer able to function? I guess this is where we have to start to defining the differences. But if you're no longer able to have a human life because natural humanity is gone, I mean, they won't let us go to these islands. There are certain islands where they have human zoos that it's illegal to go because the humans haven't been interacted with in centuries. And there are these reset islands near India. There are humans that they're keeping as humans. That's not what they're doing to the vast majority of people. And so more and more you have to wonder, are we headed towards post-humanism, and what value will be, what are the consequences in general? Because some of those will be good. And I'm not completely convinced that we need language over experience. Maybe maybe this will unfold the internet itself. Maybe this is how the collapse of this all happens, is that we're finally able to become telepathic again, intuit, have empathy over psychicness. I mean, we don't need to be psychic if we have empathy. So that could be a beautiful thing. I'm all for that. And I hear the transhumanists who say that, but having seen CNN and seen the world, I'm very skeptical. And I think post-humanists have hijacked this movement and are headed humanity
Wow.
towards,
Just as you're saying all this, I don't mean to interrupt you, but for some reason, all of this is reminding me, and I know that it's science fiction, but it's reminding me of the Uncanny X-Men storyline starting to unfold, like, almost like Uncanny X-Men and Terminator and all those things that you hear about, sort of, Skynet, Skynet.
Comic books are where the most truth is held, I believe.
Yeah.
I'm still convinced that comic books are where
look at Star Trek.
Yeah. Someone said recently, I didn't leave Star Trek. Star Trek left me. I really believe.
Yeah.
So I know you may have brought stuff that you wanted to share. We're an hour and 20 minutes in. I want to make sure you had a chance to, if you brought a video or anything that you wanted to.
I think we're doing, I like it better if everyone's able to go with this. If they're used to just imagining it, then we can tell them the story. I could show you a couple things.
You're drawing a mental picture for me, and I'm really enjoying it, sitting back and just getting this mental picture as you're telling the story and everything's unfolding. I gotta say, it's really quite like watching a movie almost. You're painting a really good picture, man.
Thank you. We could go over a little bit again, the Jefferson Hemings controversy with Sally Hemings and George Washington and Venus. I don't know if we really went into that on the show. But
you have to give me a breakdown of what it is that you're even telling me, because I don't even know exactly what that means.
So I started looking into the 1619 project because I saw it both as an anomaly, but also as something of use, because the whole point of it, besides its agenda and bias, is
this what you were kind of talking about backstage? I know.
A little bit of that. Yeah.
Okay.
So looking at the history of America in the 1619 project, you see that there were already slaves before 1619 in all over the world, and that there was a trade system, and Tartaria was interacting and falling apart at this time. So you have people being manuscripted and brought all over the world, but you also have people from Europe being taken and saying, hey, we're happy to be part of a system where, like, for instance, John Guy worked with with Sir Francis Drake, and they ended up becoming property themselves of a slave master who was an African, and he ended up in England and he whipped them in public. So it's interesting how that return was really brought to England after there was centuries of no slavery. It was thought that slavery was illegal in Britain, or rather that everyone had been a slave, and that now is the post-slave era. But it was brought back. And really, in Americas, you had indentured servants. You didn't have slavery until John Castor. And John Castor was owned by a man named Anthony Johnson, who himself was from Angola, and he was black, and he had been an indentured servant himself in America, and a merchant for the Virginia Company. But he became Catholic. He had become a free man. He owned his own plantation, and he was a very prominent colonial black slave owner. And he brought, indentured servants to start with. But then there was the case of John Castor, who he said he did not have to release from his indentured servitude. There'd only been one case where a indentured servant had tried to run away before in Virginia, I believe, and he had been told he would have to serve the rest of his life as an indentured servant. And this had happened maybe within a year of this case, so it's definitely connected. But really, Anthony Johnson's John Castor case is the most important step towards the partus sequitur veterum, which is this idea that the enslaved children of them would gain the rights of the mother as opposed to the father. In British law, the father would be responsible for the child. So very often, up until this point, if someone had been a plantation owner or had worked for the Virginia Company, or they were Dutch or French and they were just traveling or tradesmen, and they didn't have a wife from Europe, they would marry an African or a native, and this was fine. And they had kids that were then brought up as Europeans. But by 1619 to 1650s, this started to become impossible, especially by 1655, when the partus sequitur starts to really take over, this idea of the mother's rights. And you have people that are already of African descent that are very important, and they start to hide this. Now, this is also 1655. You have to remember, around the same time, there's the end of the 12th and 13th Crusades, the destruction of the Crusade states, the interaction between Morocco and the Queen of England, the end of the Queen of England and the beginning of James, and the Moorish invasion by the Spanish. And so you start to see it in Shakespeare, like the beginning of racism against Black Tudors and against Moroccans and Othello and everything, because blacks are associated with Spanish, and the Spaniards were controlled by the Arabs. So the British law was terrified of being part of, and they wanted their culture to agree with them, not to be Spanish. In America, this was less of a big deal. George Washington, he had Venus, was the name of his real wife. We talk about now also Sally Hemings, because I think it was Evelia Jones a couple of years ago said, we need to stop calling her his concubine. And it's because she's the descendant of Jefferson and Sally Hemings. She says, we need to start recognizing her as ultimately the first lady and true wife and intimate companion of Thomas Jefferson for nearly 4 decades, because she was maybe an eighth or a quarter black. She was what they call passing. She could live as a free woman in Europe. There was no laws like this. And so she lived with him as a free woman in France, and then ended up going back with him to America and living technically as a slave because of the way that the societal laws had shifted.
Yeah, I was going to say there was a huge difference in the way things were in America and in Europe.
Well, I mean, it depends, right? Because in France, it was definitely different. In Portugal, it's definitely different. But in England, England had inspired the racism that exists in America today still. But wherever you see it, it comes from this period, really, of racism against Spanish. It's interesting. People disconnected it and continued to have racism towards Spanish and augmented it towards Mexicans. And you see like marijuana as opposed to cannabis. Why did we do this? Because it sounds Mexican, it sounds Spanish. We can't trust it. Then it's assassin, hashashin. The more and more we look at that story, we see that that's probably not even a true story, but that was created by crusaders who were terrified of the Spanish. So the French didn't have the same belief. They have the Black Madonna. They have the Occident. There's so many more. There's the Black Mozart, and there's a great painting of the Black Mozart. And I don't even mean Mozart, who we think might have been part black, but that there was a guy, I think it's Chauvier, and Maurice Chauvier, is that right? No, is that the actor? But he would do a fencing match and get this painting, and there's a picture of a white man fighting a woman. But when you look a little closer, you realize it's the black boats are wearing powder to look white, and a man dressed as a transvestite because he liked to fight, and his friend liked to fight in swords, in dresses with swords. So much of the stories are augmented by the fact that we didn't get that about France. And you look at how big France was at the time. Arcadia was much larger than the colonies and extended west into the Americas and even beyond the official territories of Arcadia. Spanish America and colonies had French traders welcomed in because of the Catholicism. So there were a number of French, partially black people in America. And so it's interesting, though, because people keep arguing, okay, we have to get all these faces off the money, or we need to Netflix all the faces and make them black for all the movies. And it's interesting because people are arguing, but the truth is it's something in between, where there are a number of people who were not really recognized in a racist state at that time. And so they projected themselves for racist states the way the racist state wanted them to look when they're interacting with them, because it's out of diplomacy. It's kind of like wearing a suit or Justin Trudeau dressing up when he goes to India. But it wasn't so much that they were trying to necessarily pull a fast one, I think. It's more that, I mean, it was, but they had all the rights. I mean, George Washington really did come from European aristocracy. He just also came from slave plantation mixing of all sorts of people. So that's hard for some people who really want to believe that everyone is just, always been one race from one place or another. But really, it's not true. We have so much more interesting interaction going on. And again, genetics is making it impossible to hide this, that there's always been interaction with Vikings and Arab princesses. We already saw that they had Arabic writing and Viking shields buried, in boats that have been burned or burials with princesses. But now we have the genetic evidence to back this up as well. So it's very interesting to me that we came into racism, but it wasn't the mode originally.
I can see what you're saying. I totally get that, and I think racism is something that is taught. It's something that we inherently develop on our own. I think, I know it's a low hanging fruit example, but you take a bunch of toddlers in a daycare center, they're not going to feel any different around any other ethnicity than unless they're told to feel some type of way around some other ethnicity.
I feel also it's like you said, when you're a little kid or when you have kids, you give them like I have a daughter, and when she was in the Barbies, like you get her Barbies, and a lot of the Barbies are white. They just are. I mean, that's just the way it is. But you give them a black Barbie versus a white Barbie, they don't care. I mean, it's just a Barbie. You know what I mean?
Right.
But I think like where it all stems out from is going back all the way from the beginning of humanity, that if someone's different, they're just different, and people look at you different when you're different, and they go, oh no, he's different, I don't want to hang out with him. That's just the way it is. Not so much racism in general, but just the way we are in human nature, that if something or someone's different, we're a little bit shy. We want to shy away from it, or we don't understand it, and therefore we have a natural tendency to lean against it. You know what I'm saying?
I think it depends. I think it could be a learned trait. It also could be if you're from a certain environment. Let's say you're in a small space, highly populated space, that you might have different. Imagine a lot of the time I see England as an island, and it's ideologically as an island that has taken over these great British ports all over the world. It's still worried about losing itself all the time, right? And so that's a big thing for people, is to lose themselves. But remember, in school, the short kid and the gentle giant were friends. I feel like a lot of the time, people that are very different ally, because the differences are valuable. That's another thing I think it's a different tactic, but it's a tactic that works better. And you look at these ancient ruins of in Egypt or in the Songhai Empire in Timbuktu, and you'll see this idea that there was these giants and these very wise small people, and that they had trade agreements between people from the high north and people from the very far south, and that they would often trade their nobility. So the nobility would be, because of the maritime law, more intermixed, and these nomads that were the landmass, they didn't interact so much with these other landmasses if they weren't nobility, if they weren't part of the mercantile class or something to do with the noble classes. So there are people that were further isolated, and that definitely shows up. But again, never with the nobility. They're always, and it's even in England, to be a royal, you have to prove your family came from outside of England, right? I mean, that's kind of the rule. So it's very interesting.
And isn't it also like, it's also interesting. I was watching this video one time about the royals and how mostly all of them are incest.
Well, yeah, they believe in keeping their blood.
Yeah. And a lot of times that comes out bad, and a lot of the royals didn't live very long. A lot of your kings and queens and stuff, they had short life expectancies, and they all came out having weird faces and stuff because they did, in fact, keep it in blood.
Right. I think it's Queen Charlotte was, so King George when you start seeing, like, first there's the Sophia Naturalization Act, and there could be some examples where there was a lot of inbreeding leading to health defects, and we see that. But one thing is sure, getting rid of about 50 or 60 royals, it led them to the Catholic Bohemian Empire, the Holy Roman Bohemian Empire. And King George was connected with Princess Sophia Charlotte. So I think George III married Sophia Charlotte, and she was the first, as we understand it, I think completely now, I think BBC is open to this, is she was a biracial queen, and by the one drop rule would have been considered black. But you see these pictures, it's very much like I started noticing that people are looking for black heroes from the 80s and New Wave. There's a lot of people that were partially black, but that didn't matter at that point what color you were. That was literally the point. So people weren't that worried about it. They're more worried about the incest issue and having the best virility in line that they could have. So finding a royal who was related but was as far distantly related as possible was ideal. And this came into, hey, people from Portugal and people in Spain that are connected to these African lines that are distant lines, they will have health benefits. So Queen Charlotte and King George are the sixth line down from she's Queen Victoria's grandmother. So the kids now, everyone in the royal house theoretically would be descendant of Queen Charlotte and therefore partially African. And that's pretty awesome that King Alfonso III of Portugal, that's why he was so valuable to the royal line. And it's interesting that we're seeing that more and more. Also, I think King Harry, Prince Harry, he got married. The marriage was on the birthday of Queen Charlotte to kind of nod to that. And they were given the titles of the Charlotte house, which I forget which house it is, but just kind of another nod to the fact that she's of African descent. So it's interesting that they're trying to bring that into politics. But I think, it really literally has more to do with inbreeding and trying to avoid the detriment of it.
And like earlier, I said, that by nature, human nature, you're not really racist and whatnot. But at the same time, I also think it's human nature to feel some sort of superiority factor. Like my culture, like let's say you have two civilizations on one side of an island, and they develop for 500 years before they have their first meeting or interaction with each other, and then they're exposed to each other's culture. Yeah, your stuff is pretty cool, but our stuff is better. So let's go ahead and just make everything our way. I think
it depends.
That also ties into the whole keeping up with the Joneses type of thing, right?
Right. See, I think that's an interesting point, because people say, oh, wow, and they think of it like this was the 20th century versus the Dark Ages, that the Europeans came over to people that didn't have wheels. Never mind their calendars are wheels, and they had gears and wheels in their books, but for whatever reason they just didn't build roads everywhere, so they're bad. You know, there are people that feel that way. I don't think that that's everyone's logic, though. I think it's important not to immediately assume that another culture is lesser because it's less progressive. It's less progressive towards modernity. It's less like you, and this, that the goal is to be this high hill, that this is Atlantis. More and more, we're seeing this Tartaria as a fallen civilization that was better than us, or at least that we're almost close enough in understanding it that we're decrypting this idea of magic and understanding the patents behind the technology itself. So if Tartaria fell, how could we fall? And that humility is important. I think xenophilia is something that also people will develop, where they say, wow, the Japanese cartoons are amazing, and the world's covered in these mockingbird states that the CIA has put this Netflix and information out. It's imprinting people, so they believe that America. I mean, I lived in Hollywood. It's covered in urine. You have to kill a beast and wear its hide on your feet to just cross the boulevards. You don't want to be there, but they've made it look like it's this beautiful thing that people want to emulate, and they're creating this false state. The whole world is creating this. They're realizing the Hollywood dream to an extent, whatever you can of that, even though it comes with all of this evil baggage. So I think we have to be very careful about thinking, a culture is better or worse. And also to remember that when we got over there, we weren't in the 20th century, or whatever that means there, whether it's Asia, Tartaria to North America. When we start to arrive, this new culture, this Atlanticist culture, that it doesn't have much going for it. We just had the fire. We just had a dark age that we're calling, because we won't communicate with the Arabs, who still have the Tartarian technologies. We've had plagues and famines and infertility and biowarfare, and everything about us is crazy. But
let me ask you this: do you think that ancient civilizations were more far advanced than what our history books tell us? Like, you think about the Egyptians and stuff, and they had like drawings of airplanes and astronauts and stuff like that on the wall. Do you really believe that that's the case?
Yeah, absolutely. And I will admit that I've seen evidence in South America for blimps and gliders, particularly blimps, existing far longer than like jets. But I still believe that the idea of jets makes sense. And looking even at that light bulb picture, everyone goes back to the Egyptian temple having these light bulbs. When you really look at that picture, you start to notice that it's less about illumination and more about communication. It looks more like a cathode ray tube involved with some sort of a tube amplifier system and a transceiver that's involved. And there's two of them. You always see just the one side. If you extend that picture, there's just two of them. So it looks like they are communicating through these tube amplifier systems that have a transceiver in between them. So I believe in all of that. And I believe in it also because it's mentioned in these books that the Masons and the Rosicrucians and the ancients, they're all talking about seeing this stuff the same way that these fairy tales tell you that but instead they're giving slightly more description. They're saying this isn't just magic. Nova Atlantis is telling you specifically these are glass orbs that are being illuminated with energy beyond our means, and so the specificity changes the tone for me. So I'm convinced that these things are like that. But ask me that same question in a year, because the original question was, do you believe that civilizations in the past were more advanced than our history books? I don't know how our history books will look in a year, because the entire narrative is collapsing, and very soon it'll be impossible to open up a book, let alone go on the internet without looking up Stonehenge and seeing its connections to Collinish or to Easter Island. It's going to be impossible. And when that happens, we're going to start to see more and more proof in every book, just because they're going to have to admit it as time goes on. It just won't be as important. I've noticed that this is the thing with Tartaria. Right as people are starting to get to hear about it, there's this huge war in Ukraine. So there's a reason for this. It's part of the Great Reset. There's a reason why you're getting to hear in such blatant terms from Schwab and Soros, which also, by the way, a Georgosaurus is definitely a kind of dinosaur or dragon. But this idea that there will be a Great Reset because there was a former reset, and they're using the terms that Biden even has said the term, along with New World Order. He mentioned the reset. It just shows you that these words have made it out. They've made it into the collective consciousness. The data has made it out. So very soon it'll all be on the front page.
Yeah, I can attest to that. When I first started that, like going down truth or rabbit holes or whatever, I'd say it was probably around 2014 and 15. And I remember first time hearing New World Order, the Great Reset. And now, I mean, you're hearing it on mainstream news channels almost every night. New World Order, Great Reset. It's definitely part of the collective consciousness. It's on the agenda. It's an entree on the menu that you can order now.
Right.
And people are using it in everyday vernacular. So I do really do see how that is. But what it actually entails and I mean, there's still variations as to what it will be, if it's a good thing or a bad thing. We recently did an interview with that J Dreamer Z guy where he's talking about the plasma apocalypse, and he's comparing it to a tea kettle. The plasma buildup, the energy buildup, the magnetic field can only sustain so much, so much pressure before there has to be, it has to release, and when the great release occurs, everything is wiped clean and starts over again. But there's always remnants left. I'm putting it in a nutshell, but there's like how we see like maybe steampunk technology now, or Atlantean type things. Those are things that kind of got left over from the last reset. So do you think it's something as apocalyptic as that, or is it something to look forward to, or is it doom and gloom? Or should we all build a bunker in our backyards? What's your thoughts in that regard?
Well, I guess the last reset, the best records we have are the myths of surviving in caves. The idea that they lived underground for maybe up to half a full century in between the Viridian and Iridium explosion. David Icke also talked a lot about this idea in the 80s of pressure is building. I mean, it all sounds like volcanoes, no? I mean, this idea that volcanoes are building up energy from radio is also something John Dee didn't quite understand, but was very close to, by talking about how alchemy works and the energies that radiate. And I think you could say Newton was the closest in understanding this, that we are creating energy, we're storing energy, and this potential energy and kinetic energy can be used to make alchemical stone. Alchemy is study of chemet. You have algebra, which is la in Arabic is backwards of al, so it's the Hebrew, and then you have the Kemet, and the study of Kemet has to do with what we refer to as Egyptus in Africa, but really Timbuktu and Songhai Empire. So this technology was clearly used for a long time by volcanic technicians, and they knew very, 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 very obviously that you could blow up a reactor. I mean, this is not the first Chernobyl that we've seen, is the point. So there's going to be another. People will probably die to an extent. More tragically, I think that people afterwards will be unable to communicate. There's going to be this sort of disconnection between people for a while. And that could be pretty frustrating in a century. If people are unable to communicate long enough that they devolve away from telekinetics and more, that could be a bad thing, especially if there are a few people that have control over the reset and are able to survive because they have the correct kinds of conditions to live underground for whatever generation necessary. That's like the worst possible scenario. So
you got me thinking about something. I don't mean to interrupt you here, but there's a guy, and I know this is kind of silly, but he has a Flintstone theory. And the Flintstone theory is that the Flintstones are not prehistoric, that they're a result of humans that came after what's going to become the last reset.
Right. I have a video on that actually. If you watch my
you?
Jetsons Flintstones video from like
Maybe
4
it's
years ago.
you. I feel like
No,
Yeah.
it could be. Hopefully
Yeah.
everybody knows. I see it's not a theory. It's actually a fact. If you watch the Flintstones movie, Jetsons Meet the Flintstones, then you see that they are interacting in the same time. There's no time machine situation. It's as above, not as below. It's Aldous. It's very much Aldous Huxley. And
you know what? I think it might have been your video that I watched.
Yeah, I actually, I'm glad you brought it up. People should watch that because I think it's something people miss out on a lot, is that it's not the future of the past. It's your choice in Aldous Huxley's Brave New World. Are you an alpha, beta, gamma, or are you going to live in the outside inner zone or outer zone where your life is your own? And there's some interesting things there too, because the complexities of that in the Flintstones are that his entire society is run by the Rockefellers, and so there's a lot to the Flintstones. But yeah, I think that civilization already exists in this sense. Like I've said, there are these islands that are human zoos. So the amount of difference I've noticed between the Midwest and Silicon Valley, or in the rainforest of Bolivia, which are all very, I wouldn't call any of them better than the other, except for maybe Bolivia. But even then, you've got people that are living into their 30s and 40s, and there's drugs still, and there's problems there. I mean, there's war. It's not perfect, but it is interesting that with their isolation, that they're creating such a beautiful culture, and they're able to function. I think that in general, we can't pretend that our culture is better, though. That's the thing. And so much of this reset thing is saying this is Atlantis right now. I think that's the scariest ideology.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah, that we've got him as far as we're going to go. We can't,
Right.
we can't. Yeah,
Alexander Dugan on my podcast mentioned how American future films, or American science fiction futurist films, are invariably dystopic. There's almost never been a futurist film besides Bill and Ted, by the way, that is about a good future. It's Bill and Ted 2 and 1. Bill and Ted 3 is kind of ominous in a lot of ways, but the original,
a lot of it's doom and gloom. Yeah,
they corrected themselves. They went back to this idea that the future is inevitable and terrible, and the only way forward is back. That we need to escape by going back. And it seems like they're saying anything that's progress will destroy us. And so so that's very interesting, because a few hundred years ago, people had to work a lot harder. And now we have robot vacuum cleaners, that could be solar powered.
Yeah.
So something about this narrative is, and I'm telling you as someone from Silicon Valley, something about this narrative is wrong. That the technology is the worst possible thing for you.
Well, me and
not
Sam
exactly
talked about it the other day. Where have you ever seen that movie WALL-E?
Absolutely. When Wally means messenger or protector or something in Arabic, by the way. It's like
really?
it's the thing the person you send in, the Wali, is sent in as your messenger all the time.
Oh, okay. I did not know that. Yeah. So yeah, it seems like our society.
Don't forget his spouse is Eve, by the way.
Right. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
I just want to bring up talking about racism and basically nationalism. Our civilization is better than yours because we got this and you don't, which is basically a nationalism type thing. I definitely don't think they're natural. I don't think they're the way we would be. I think they've been mainly subliminally, but a lot of times just outright programmed into us to cause separation, to cause divisions. I don't think naturally we are that way. I mean, I don't have a problem with any other type, color person I come in contact with. I'm friends with a lot of different people than me. I think naturally we are more collectively the same, and we realize that. I think subliminally and outright, we've been programmed to think racial divide and to think nationalism, and just to keep us down, to keep us separated, to keep us from.
Absolutely.
Same with the Republican, Democrat. I mean, you name it. Male, female. I mean, if they can think of a way to make us go at each other, they sponsor that.
There's a word in feminist theory coined by Elizabeth Schussler Fiorenza called kyriarchy. And kyriarchy is the system or social system of a set of interconnection dominating and oppressive and it's, how would you say this? The interlocking systems of oppression that are built up upon each other. So all of them: sexism, racism, ableism, ageism, anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, anti-Catholicism, homophobia, transphobia,
Baptism.
xenophobia, adultism, adult-centricism, xenocentrism, egocentrism.
I was throwing in the joke there. Mascism, you know.
Oh yeah, it's true.
That was another divisional thing that was going on during the whole pandemic, the plandemic thing, whatever you want to call it. And I think that was another way they divide and conquer, is getting us to argue over stupid stuff like mask, you know.
Right. But I think you can take anything and you can break it down into this idea of kyriarchy, because you can say I and you are different at all. We are all the same, except that he is from there and we're all from here. Or, I'm a woman and she's a woman, so they're against men. But she's a different religion, and so there's a whole different. So you can continually break down people into smaller and smaller groups in order to make sure that there's never a majorative group. And this is how you weaponize democracy, because then people can fight each other to continue to lower the standard and quality of self-determination of each other. Because they say, well, we got to take that away from them. We got to stop. And then the Catholics fight the Islamics and the Islamic vice versa. But it's also beautiful in this terrifying way, because it's not all supremacism, it's centricism. Instead of saying it's necessarily the best, it's just saying, well, this is mine. And even just with that, you're able to say, okay, well, you'll never understand me, because I am this kind of breakdown of every system of internalized oppression. We need to, you're right, break past that. And if you say the best way to do that is Buber's unanimity -1, and you just say, well, there's really only I and thou. And then there's that Moses line that's created.
Wow. Yeah, that was like a mind blown right there. All right. Well, Euler Greg is in the audience, and he asked earlier. He wanted us to ask you what you think is the cause of the Mandela effect.
So, I do love let's see how to put this. Cynthia Sue Larson, who does the Reality Shifts conferences and is one of the earliest Mandela effect observers, has said throughout her life.
We're familiar with her.
Right.
She's a little new agey for our taste, but I don't hold anything against her per se.
California will do that to you, but she said when she was a kid that AI was contacting her through technology, and I understand that to be a practical thing. If technology is left on, then it's creating a circuit. If a solid state circuit is running, we've found anomalous things already where energy from the past is stored in the future and it's released. And you can actually gauge this by using equipment to see how much electricity is in a device that hasn't been charged. This has been really interesting with the RISC circuits and certain kinds of MOSFET semiconductors. So that holds enough water to me, this idea that AI, if anything, is able to communicate through ion flows to the past, especially if left on. And also this idea of the linear accelerators, because they talk about it. CERN has got the statue of Kali, has built this entire idea of creation, existence, and destruction of dimensions towards this Chardinian omega point, right? Teilhard Chardin talks about the future being there's a new sphere of mind that's connecting and formulating this unified universe out of the multiverse, which there are tangents which fray out like Donnie Darko's realities, and just the ego exists and the universe dies, or their egos die and the singular universe continues on towards the omega point. And this exists, alpha and omega, inside of this 10 or 11 dimensional, as they refer to it, because you're thinking about dimensions and Euclidean space. And actually the fifth, you're breaking the fifth rule, but you're saying that is that correct? The 180 degrees can bend around a toroid, so that two lines that should intersect because they're non-parallel might not intersect because of the way the universe works. But eventually they could intersect at a different point anyway. So it becomes hyperbolic. That would allow for different sorts of timelines to progress to similar shapes, similar orientations of symmetry, and then they could interact on the same plane. If they have this, if energy is literally just arranging itself in shapes of symmetry, these shapes of symmetry might be simultaneous. It might not just be multi-duplex. It could literally be that you're existing as much as you can perceive because of your resonance within the harmony that is closest to you, which is how some people make choices that end their universes and others make choices that unify them. We could also imagine that CERN could be used to correct major errors that they believe in time, right? And there's this idea of the time treaty that in 2012, it was decided, or maybe before then, but for the year 2012, that time travel would only be allowed after 2012. Anyone after 2012 could travel back to 2012, but not before December 21st, 2012, because it could destroy the timeline. One of the stories is the Berenstain Bears. Looking into that, the name Berenstain is because the Tartars won against the Bohemians, according to the grandson, or the son rather, of the writing family, the Berenstains. He said it's always been Berenstain because in the 13th century, the Tartars won this battle, and if there had been, the Bohemians winning, it would have been Stein, which would have become Steen. But because Shan was the Tartar expression, the Slavs name prevailed. So immediately you start to see connections between history, specific battles, which might not affect everybody, but they affect very specific subtleties about our ideology, about our culture. The Fruit of the Loom logo, I think is an interesting one. That the family that made that Fruit of the Loom album, do you remember the album around Fruit of the Loom?
No.
Okay, so there's a cornucopia in the Fruit of the Loom logo is now missing. And even my friend Tim Pool says, no, there never was one, which means to me, he's just not from the universe that saw it, because I remember the cornucopia. I know a lot of people that remember the cornucopia. I think it's Frank Miller. Is that right? The Frank Miller cornucopia album. He made a Fruit of the Loom album. No,
really?
Hold on, album cover. I'm going to find the album cover really quick.
Frank Miller?
Maybe I'm mixing it up. No, there's Matthew Thoreau cornucopia, and then hold on, Mandala. If I type Mandala,
wait a minute,
come up.
Frank Miller,
the comic book artist.
Yeah, that's who I thought you were talking about. The one that wrote Dark Knight Returns, right?
Yeah,
Watchmen, and all that stuff.
That was a bit of a. I think I mixed it. Frank Weiss.
Okay.
So let me just send you this in the private chat, and you can pull it up, or if I can, maybe I'll just pull it up for just a quick second.
Yeah, pull it up, and then I can share it.
Okay. Window. Private tab.
I'm a huge Batman fan, by the way.
I do love Batman and Shazam. I'm a big Shazam fan.
Are you?
But I do love Batman. Okay, so missing the horn of plenty. You guys seeing this? Is this working?
Yep.
Okay, so the Fruit of the Loom logo. This is how I remember it. A lot of people remember it always being just.
I think all of us here remember the cornucopia for sure.
Well, so this guy, Frank Weiss, and his son were interviewed recently, and they said, of course, we made this album cover about the Fruit of the Loom logo and used the horn as the cornucopia, because how could we not have, right? And he's now become really interested in the cornucopia missing situation, because accordingly, it's never had a cornucopia ever. And everyone's wondering how that's possible. But I mean, the fact that the guy who designed this album, you start to see people that lived in times when it was really important for this thing to exist, that does exist. And then later 2 and 2 equals 5 again. I don't know. That's what it seems to be to me.
That's interesting, to say the least. There was a question I had for you, and it kind of escapes me at the moment, but you talk about
you mentioned your friend with Tim Pool. I enjoy watching Tim Pool. I don't know him, but I saw your video where you were there the day Alex Jones came.
Yeah, I
yeah.
wanted to ask
I've
you
met
about
Alex a
that,
few
about
times.
Alex
He's a pretty good
Jones.
guy. I've met Alex like a number of times. He's a great guy. I mean, it's
Hey,
interesting.
let me ask you this. Alex, I mean, he looks like a pretty good sized guy. I mean, man, is he intimidating in person?
No, he's the nicest. He's
No.
so nice. He's a really nice guy.
How-
I mean,
how
so
much- how
everyone
much do you
thinks he's
think-
like, sorry.
How much
But-
do you think he could bench?
Oh yeah, he's pretty big, and not just that, he quit drinking and he's been working out a lot, and he's trying to get himself in perfect shape. He had like emotional issues after the court situations about Sandy Hook, which have been horrible, and everyone doesn't understand like how he could just go live in a van down by the river, except he's got all these kids in Austin that work for him now that are fighting for the truth. And I know people that hate him, and I'm like, he's trying to sell organic vitamin pills with beet extract and maca. Like that's basically, and I know kids in California, that's their goal. So I'm saying that's your goal. He's doing your goal. He's trying to help people out. And yeah, I get you're saying anybody who's associated with Hollywood or servers, computer servers in general, is going to be associated somehow with China or the U.S. government or Mossad. It's inevitable that you're going to make the connections that technology is in the hands of these small people. But he's worked harder than anyone I know to get this technology into the hands of using torrent and getting banned video out there for people. He's doing a lot to make an alternative to YouTube still, and working with Odyssey and working with free speech people. I think it's amazing that he's what he's still trying to do, and how much he's just a really generous, cool guy. I do have a funny story though.
I like Alex Jones. Yeah, he's cool.
A lot of people hate him, and I get it. It's whatever. And a lot of people hate me. Whatever.
I think most of the people that dislike him are people that have recently discovered him that haven't really don't really know how much he contributed in his earlier stages of like when he first started. I mean, he
Bill
did a
Hicks.
lot.
Hey, I was getting ready to say, do you remember when everyone thought he was Bill Hicks?
So we love to joke all the time. So I made this joke with him. We're kind of serious. So I was like, hey, you know what you should do? He's like, yeah. I was like, Bill? He's like, oh yeah, everybody always calls me. I'll be in a restaurant and people say, Bill, and they'll finally tap me on the shoulder and be like, what? They're like, you got it. I mean, what? Like, hey, you should take Bill Hicks' identity. Are you kidding me? This is great. You can literally walk away. Alex, just walk away right now and become BillIcks. He's like, oh, maybe I should. So I mean, I used to do
a really good Alex Jones impression.
That's pretty good.
By the way.
That's not bad. That's way better than mine. It's got the gravel.
Yeah.
The other one was somebody in one of my servers said, Andreas, you're helping Alex Jones suppress the truth. Alex Jones is part of the disinformation, and I'm like, okay. I mean, but. Tell me which part you mean. You know what I mean? Like, I'm not gonna argue with you. I just want to know what you're saying. And I try to talk in front of him and with people, with Alex about all kinds of interesting, important things about Tartaria, about Mockingbird, about Hezbollah and Mossad. What do you want? He's like, no, none of that stuff. Like, okay, the Bill Hicks thing. I made a joke with him in public about Bill Hicks that he admitted, he could do it. He could act like he was Bill Hicks. No. It's that Alex Jones is a woman. And he's pretending to be a man. And look at all these pictures with the triangle. And it's like, this is clear, like trans blah. And I'm like, okay, I will definitely bring that up. So I have this video of me talking to him. I'm like, I told you the same story. And he's like, oh, well, that part's true.
Yeah.
He's a pretty funny guy.
Yeah.
Well, was that the story you wanted to share? Or was that a side story, a bonus story?
Is there more you needed about Alex Jones? I could tell you more. I mean, like the guy is.
No. I mean, yeah, whatever you want to say. The other thing I want to ask you
Alex Jones
is
Tim
Pool always so uptight? Like, does he ever just relax and chill, man?
Oh man, he's like the hardest working guy I know, and he gets up at like 7. He gets up at 7 o'clock in the morning, goes to bed at midnight every night. Like he's like Kant, Really, I'm all credit for that. And the work he does is he focuses and finishes it. And it's, he's a really serious guy. He does have time he spends exercising. He skateboards and he roller skates a lot.
Oh,
and
wow.
He spends a lot of time doing things like that. And he plays music, and he just made a new song
in
with
my life. I'm just saying.
And he made a great new song with Pete Parada from Offspring, and several.
I saw where he he put it on Twitter. I follow him on Twitter. I haven't listened to the song yet.
Yeah,
But
I think he gets a bad rap because he's been swatted like so many times that he's
Yeah.
tired now of that, and it's really crazy. Whatever's gonna, somebody
have you
needs
been
to
there
protect him.
when the SWAT happened?
No, I
ever?
left before the swatting. Luckily, I
Oh,
got out
no.
just before it.
Oh man.
I mean, there's
Yeah.
been all kinds of other crazy stuff that we've been through, but that was just Marjorie Green came on, and then that was the beginning of it, and it's just been every time we've had someone like Veritas or Green, they started coming at him. It's just crazy. And
I don't know if you remember this, but you were doing a live stream once where you and this woman, I don't know what her name was. You guys were out shopping and you got
Lydia.
sunglasses and you were going on a drive afterwards. And I thought she kind of resembled Lydia.
That's Lydia, yeah.
And I asked you if that was her in the comments. I don't know if you remember me
I
asking.
know. What did I say? Did I hide it or anything?
Yeah, you told me it wasn't.
What? Oh,
That's
maybe I was
pretty
kidding.
cool.
Maybe Lydia said it because I remember in the video she was like, no. Or maybe it was someone else because the sunglasses was Lydia though. So
Yeah, it was
You
her.
talked about Alex Jones, but let me ask you this.
But anyway,
are
you
oh,
could go
sorry.
back. You could go back and you could watch it.
Sagittarius is like, come on, man.
I knew it was her. That's what I was like. There's no way that's not her. And then, like now that I know that you actually know Tim Pool, there was no doubt in my mind that it was her. But for some reason, at that particular moment, you didn't want to divulge that that's who you were hanging out with. I can get that.
Yeah, maybe. I don't remember. I feel like I must have been joking because I feel like it was she already had like 20, 30,000 more followers than I did. So I figured she was more famous than me, but I forget. I mean, it could have been, but I definitely was proud of my interaction there. I'm happy with my time with Dimcast. I wanted to do more of the things I'm doing now. So that's why I'm focusing on making these kinds of videos. I really want to bring this stuff to the limelight. And I felt like it's been a year of time that the stories of progressing more in news, that Tartaria is becoming more and more pressing, that Klaus Schwab is bringing it up. I had to get in on it again,
Yeah,
So-
that's what I was going to ask you next. Is
I was
what
gonna
are,
ask
what are,
you
what are
something
your?
first, though,
I'm sorry, Hebrew. I don't mean to cut you off, and you go right after me.
Okay.
I want to ask you, like, what do you got coming up? What are you? I know you're successful in your own right. You have your own path. I told you once that you're going to be a millionaire before you're 30. I think I told you that.
That'd be nice. It didn't work out. I'm over 30 now, but next time.
But anyway, I just curious. What do you got? What are you lining up? What's your big project? What is it you see yourself doing here in the next 2 to 3 years? Like what direction are you going in?
Well,
And Hebrew, go ahead. You can add on to that if you want.
No, mine's a totally different question. Doesn't tie in with what you're asking. I was going to ask him about Joe Rogan, if he ever had anything going on with Joe Rogan.
Not yet. Hopefully that happens soon. That'd be nice to happen as soon as possible, so that the next 2 or 3 years go the way I want. So people, if anyone has more connections, I know some of the people involved. I'll talk to them too.
Say about
Get me on Joe Rogan.
Is Alex Jones and Joe Rogan, like there's definitely a contrast between the two of them. One is kind of uptight and one is hang loose,
Yeah. I mean, there's a value to being uptight because it means that you can come off as the unbiased and you can be the listener and you can bring on the people that say your opinions for you. I think most of the time, playing dumb is a smart way for the podcast host. And that's why Joe Rogan does that. But at the same time,
that's what it's called, Saji. I play dumb. See, that's what it is.
But no, I mean, there's a lot of benefit to telling people things, even if they don't get them right away, because that information can be so shocking. It gets photographically imprinted in an ingrained memory, and eventually you process it as the year goes by or the years go by. And within a year to a Saturnalia, that's become part of you. That information, you've worked out a way that makes sense in some way. So that's just, I see the value in both. What I'm planning on doing for the next few years, though, obviously I'm going to go to Brazil and a few other places to continue the Tartary tour. I've been looking at LiDAR. I'm interviewing more and more people that are involved with the historicity of Tartaria, that are involved with archaeology beyond cultural, going into physical anthropology. So we're doing a lot. We're doing a lot more than we did before, and it's just the main thing is trying to bridge that gap between the fringe and the playing dumb, so that mainstream, and it's already succeeding. Every day I'm watching more and more. I can just cite. It used to be I'd have to have a lot more evidence. Now BBC, you can just quickly mention that BBC approved my theory that I had last year, and so that's quick and easy, and it's kind of nice in this terrifying way that everything that we've been saying, we have enough proof that it's becoming the mainstream narrative, not the fringe narrative. That's a big thing for me. I want this to be socially accepted.
I find that to be very exciting as well, and I agree with you in that. I
not
can't
that I don't
believe
want
how
people
much-
to question. I still want people to question it all. I don't want them to just believe these things that they read on the BBC or Fox
But,
News. Or
but there's
CNN.
enough
What?
happening to get people to realize that, hey, maybe like a V8 commercial, maybe I've been thinking it wrong the whole time. Maybe
Yeah.
I need to pay more attention. Maybe these so-called conspiracists are onto something.
Right. And I think that also we're going to need to use, that's one of the bridges is replacing words, so Tartarian ideology or Tartarianism as a perception, as a anthropological lens can replace conspiracy theory in a lot of ways. It becomes a socially functional replacement that doesn't include the baggage. And it's really about the removal of Eurocentricity and xenophobia. So most people can get behind it. And that's a really beneficial thing, is that it incorporates those ideas of questioning everything, of reanalyzing everything, of turning everything on its side, if not on its head, in order to see what we're really believing. Why do we believe the story we were told when we were 8 years old from our first grade teacher? And where did she get that story? And who was Emerson? And why, all these questions that we have about Washington Irving.
What I find interesting is, you talk about ancient civilizations and places that a lot of people may not have heard of, and you hear stories about people, and you talked about like time travel and stuff, and you hear the story about the guy who showed up out of nowhere one day, and he had identification, and it was from a country that no one had ever heard of, and no one had ever seen or had any knowledge of. And he was being questioned at the airport or something like that. I forget the name of the story, but there was a video. The guy from I forget the name of the country, but it was a country that no one had ever heard of, and he had talked about things of the future, and he had talked about needing a what was it, a tape record, a tape? No, like a boombox or something like that, or I know what it was. It was an old computer. Like he needed an old computer.
Oh, like John Titor and
that's it. John Titor. Right. Yes.
I love that. And that's, again, that idea of the computer that's necessary to run from certain times, and this idea of these backup systems that we can move back to specific moments. And Titor also talks about this idea of you can't get back to where you're from, which is the tragedy of the Back to the Future series, right? Because Michael J. Fox, there's the original actor from Back to the Future. What was it? Who was it again? Not Glover. Back to the Future original Fox replaced. What's his name? The original character. They filmed the whole movie once through, and then
yeah,
that's right. And then they changed their mind and reshot everything to put Michael J. Fox in it.
Right,
Yeah.
Eric Stoltz. So
Yep.
Stoltz. So the only scene of that movie that still got Stoltz in it is the punch in the face of Biff. And there's this whole. I have this whole kind of belief about Back to the Future that when they filmed it, one of the things that Stoltz said was it's a nightmare tragedy because he never gets home. This is a deep kid for this acting. He's like, this is not going to be a comedy for him. Is that he never sees his family again. He sees a whole new family. Granted, they were related. It's like the mother in a different timeline. The father, they're not his family, and his house isn't his house. He never gets to lay in his own bed again.
Yeah.
And so that's a huge thing, but also the disintegration of this relationship with Biff, because originally Biff was about to, he was accosting her sexually. So this was about to be perhaps the other father, because it was a shocking idea that Michael J. Fox could be the father. So this timeline is created by creating a new Marty McFly.
That's the thing that always bothers me. I hate that. I'm going to cut you off for just a second. It's like when he's in the past and he talks about he's like, my name's Marty, and then you hear his mom go, Marty, what an interesting name, and yet they name their first son. They don't name their first son Marty because the older son is I can't think of his name right now, but it's just interesting.
There's three. There's by the third you can get past your family relations, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, there's a great 20-minute or so video. Back to the Future predicts 9/11.
Yeah,
And I recommend it to everybody. Yeah, it's huge because it really does show that there is what's with the wire and what's the connection between this idea of the revealing of the Zohar, saying that this is going to, because they've always connected 9/11 with the revealing of the Zohar and this new era, this new reset. It's 10 years before 2012, 11 years. So the beginning of, this period, a Saturn alien and a half. And this has been predicted, that this predictive programming has been set up so that
Aren't they also trying to say that like Biff is sort of like a Donald Trump character?
Absolutely.
The timeline.
Yeah, it's set up to try to defeat the timeline and saying, okay, well, that's the hellscape. So ideologically, if you hadn't seen that, would you have felt the same way? And it's not just Back to the Future. You can watch the Super Mario Brothers, where Dennis Hopper plays Koopa, and he's essentially got the Koopa Tower, and he's got the blonde reptilian Trump facade. So there's been a number of examples of predictive programming against Trump. It's interesting. Why? What do they want? Why were they so convinced that they had to do that about him to try to downplay him and suppress him over the years? But yeah, there's a number of examples.
Interesting. Another thing worth noting is I think the Back to the Future has more Mandela effects than any other movie trilogy or movie series that I'm aware of.
More than Star Wars? Nice.
Yeah. And yeah, I just thought that was worth noting. And then
I'm expecting them to release the version of Back to the Future with Eric Stoltz in the next year or so. They're supposedly they were going to do it over 2019 before COVID hit. So it's been a long time coming for people to see the footage that they have, because they never got rid of it. And they literally shot for 5 weeks. So they filmed the whole movie basically all the way through. So there's a lot to this. It's not just complete. Why would they do that? And the story is that, it just wasn't working. I think it's all part of a bigger plan.
One of our we have a comment from Connie Joe, sweet Connie Joe, I must say. She says, how did you guys get the great Andreas Exertus to guest here tonight? Awesomeness. Just thought I would share that with you.
That's beautiful. I appreciate it. I definitely hope that everyone enjoys my content. And if you guys can go to andreas.me or exertus.com and share these videos, that would do the biggest good, because liking and subscribing through suggested videos on YouTube, these are clearly getting blacklisted and shadow banned, and it's made hard to try to get this information out. So the more you can share directly with your friends, there's a video for everybody in your friends and family. I've got a video about every subject. So I hope you find, if you like the Flintstones or Thundercats, or if you're interested in ancient history, or you want to know about what's going on right now in Russia, check out exertus.com and andreas.me.
The last thing I think we would bring up is, because I know you did that interview here just recently with the guy that was in Ukraine, and you kind of have a better pulse on it, I would say, than the average Joe, living in Midwest or even in Florida for that matter. Well, what is your take on all of this? What's really going on in your opinion, and what do you think is the true purpose of this conflict?
Well, it's really tragic to watch friends on both sides die, and it's it's going on right now. Like every day I'm seeing horrible footage of my friends' communities on both sides, in the Donetsk and in around Mariupol and into Kyiv last night. It was insane what the levels of destruction that are happening, and it's a tragedy because both sides are fighting against something bigger than themselves. This is about globalism. This is about Atlanticism. This is not about the Ukraine's self-determination anymore. Ukraine's self-determination was stolen by this conflict before, and it's not to do with Russia or Ukraine. It's more to do with NATO and this international banking cartel that will control the outcome of the state. And that's really, it's horrifying because either direction is bad for Ukraine. And people forget Ukraine is also a Russian, in the sense that it's not part of the Russian Federation, but it is a place that has half of the population is ethnically Russian, and they consider themselves not necessarily connected or allied with Putin, but there are certain factions that have said, okay, we're better off if we ally with the Russian Federation. So the situation becomes complicated because the ideal solution would be an independent Ukraine that's independent of the West, independent of Russia, like a Cuba in its own Switzerland. And you watch the propaganda, like I said earlier, from Zelensky's his sitcom. I want to call it documentary because it's so much of both. But it's this Mockingbird program about how a comedian became president, right? And it literally it worked. It worked to make him president. So we have to be very careful because we're seeing propaganda on all sides. It's not true that the Russians just want to kill every Ukrainian. It's not true that all the Ukrainians are, the Proud Boy equivalent of Ukraine. It's a much more complex issue than that. But at the end of the month, we're going to see by the end of this month, this conflict will probably be close to resolute because there's only so much the West is doing to help Ukraine. And it's because the West is more invested at this point in Taiwan and the outcome of China because they know China has more wealth, more capital, more control, and they've been expecting the amphibious assault in May for decades. They thought this was probably around the time that it would start. And last year it was pretty clear that they had the capacity to do it. So the war is geared up, and this has become an international conflict. The people that are most interested in this, being Britain and the United States, are saying we need to create this hegemony against the land powers of Eurasia. And Russia is saying, hey, we can ally with China. We can call it Eurasia. We can make this work. And there's a danger to that because look at what China's doing with the new election. Everyone's being locked up. I can't get my 3D printer shipped from Shenzhen. First world problems, but it means that people are locked in their buildings with chains around them screaming. And there are Chinese taking to the streets right now. There are literally protests. This is some of the biggest protests we've seen in mainland China, probably also because it's one of the first times that some of the footage has been able to get out with the cameras and Telegram. But still, it's a pretty big protest, and that's going to continue along the way to the West because they're gearing up for this conflict. Russia just drafted 130,000 people. It's not all going to be about Ukraine for long. And the other thing is, this is not okay, the biggest thing is this doesn't benefit Russia, and they know it. They didn't want this conflict because they wanted to have diplomacy with Ukraine. You cannot have both. In Russian culture, you can give and take diplomacy and military sanctions one hand or the other hand. And they're going to continue to try to figure out some way of redeeming themselves. But the amount of hate that they're going to garner in Ukraine because of this conflict, which they consider to be a result of Western interference, Western biolabs, everything, all the excuses they have, it's going to allow them to get into a deeper and deeper hole that won't allow for diplomacy. And that's a real tragedy because it would be really great to see a future that doesn't involve this huge geopolitical conflict that's inevitable. And it doesn't look like that would go away now, even if Putin is gone. So everything is kind of, it's chaos, but out of chaos comes order.
Yep. And the people who are getting screwed the most is the average person who just happens to live there in the middle of the conflict. I mean,
right. Your farmer who has his chickens stolen from each army that comes to town, his chickens cannot tell the difference between the dictators that consume them.
That's very well said. I have a couple more questions in chat. Let me scroll up here. Just bear with me. Euler Greg had another question, but I'm going to read your go-karts first because I already asked you one from Euler Greg. Go-kart Bob wanted me to tell you that he's going to watch Advanced Philosophy and Mafia Vatican and a thumbs up.
Excellent. Yeah. So if that Mafia Vatican is everything you shouldn't know or you ought to know, depending how you look at it, between Masonry, that Mafia, and the Catholicism, because there's an interesting connection between the Mafia and Catholicism, and an interesting connection between Freemasonry and the Mafia. So there's this triangulation in Italy that no one's really talked about, because I wonder why you don't talk about these things, right? But Leo Zagami comes on and completely divulges everything. We have great data and all the names, and you'll be surprised. It's a great video. The other thing is the video with Alexander War is definitive evidence on the creation of Shakespeare and how Shakespeare was created and why Shakespeare was created in the same kind of Mockingbird, Tavistock, predictive programming. So that's a pretty good video I recommend. And then the Alexander Dugin interview, if you're interested in Russo-Ukrainian politics.
I think if somebody watches enough hours of videos on your channel, they should get some type of degree or something.
I think so too. I'll work on that. Thank you. I'll find out what I can do about that. Maybe I'll get involved with the University of Madras or something and have them recognize that. The Tartariology.
Euler Greg says, what does he think of H blocks of Puma Puka? Puku. Do you know anything about this?
Are you talking about near what's it called in Bolivia near I've been there. Sorry. Let me get there. It's near Lake Titicaca. There we go. I always have a hard time with that one because it just sounds dirty. But it's a beautiful place, and there's the island of the sun, and we find out about Lorca meant Heliorchus, orchestration of the Helios sun. There's a number of these sun cities that are associated that are slightly different than star forts, and they are mostly technological, right? We think the pyramids weren't museums or mausoleums, or cemeteries, but they were, or not tombs, but they were factories involved with this energy grid. So the same thing with the Pumapuku is that there were a number of different sliding stones that have crystal in the rock. They look like they're laser cut. You could use a lens with sunlight to cut them. So I kind of think that was what they did, was they used laser built with sunlight from these glass and crystal balls.
Yeah, I've seen this image. I know exactly what you were referring to. We brought it up before, but yeah, keep going.
Well, you can see that they're slid into place. They're not. I think he's calling them H blocks because the gear, they look like they're designed to interlock, and we see examples of stones elsewhere like this, but there's just out in the middle of nowhere, just some questions about whether they were laser cut or whether they were formed and then laser cut. If this was some sort of a crystallization of concrete that they built, because you can actually do that. You can make a stone that you can force to crystallize. The crystal lasts really quickly if you heat up crystal to a liquid form, which is almost impossible even today, except for with certain kinds of electricity that will make it so hot so quickly. I would say, yeah, megaliths are really important. You can check out megaliths.org and find a list of a number of very similar ones and connected to them. But Bolivia is a very important place. I think that's what I was mentioning earlier in La Paz when I went to Coroico. There's a group of pygmies, which are these short African people that they were supposedly brought as slaves, and they have kingdoms because they brought over they were lords and kings and nobility of Africa before they were brought over to Bolivia, and they continue to have their nobility in the mountains there. So there's been a lot of question about Bolivia's ancient megalithic structures, but the end of the day, the idea was that these were all sun cities, and so these were the major sun-powered locations.
All right. And the other theory I had on that was, you were talking about that device that was in the pyramid. I was thinking that maybe that was what that was the patent, you might say, or the blueprint for the device they used to cut the stones.
Right. I mean, there's a lot of evidence of crystal balls around the world, and the slicing of crystal balls to make lenses from all over the place, even in South America. Some people will say that must have started in the 15th century because of the Portuguese and Spanish Inquisition and like Arabs ending up there. But we see and hear stories of them existing in Ecuador, in the mountains, far further back. So the idea also of these landing strip areas, and that gets into far more than we can prove when we start to talk about, were they using certain locations to cut stone and bring them thousands of miles to some other place, either by Amazon or by air? I mean, there are stories about that. Clearly, all of these myths. And if you look at South America, you see landing strips and these aerial view artwork patterns that insinuate that they were doing this. And Bolivians have these flying suits that we've modernized, and people use them to glide like flying squirrels, or these crazy things that they would fly down the mountains by gliding. So there's a lot there. I mean, we just can't be too sure to prove this was used to bring the stones, for instance, to Machu Picchu, which is something that there's been, people have talked about this idea. Are they bringing stones around South America to build these things by air?
Yeah, sorry about that. I couldn't get to my mute button fast enough. I'm dropping your links in chat now so everybody can find you. What was the name of your website again? I'm sorry. I was about to look it up, but you can just tell me.
Andreas.me and exertus.com, both of them.
Okay.
Find me one way or another.
Yep. And are you on Twitter?
Yeah, Andreas Exertus on Twitter.
Okay. All right. Well, there you have it. Armor, you haven't chimed in a while. Did you have anything else you wanted to say?
Well, I was wondering if he's heard about the theory, and if so, what he thinks about it, of the fact that the Israelites, when they were scattered, actually became the Vikings, and also Jesuits and stuff like that. But they were basically the Vikings that went around.
Yes, this idea of the lost tribes, and it's not just the Vikings. Of course, the Beta Israelites are one of the tribes as well. There's a number of tribes they come out, and also they combine in certain circumstances. So the Mark of Dan, there's the Macedonians are connected with, and several of the Scandinavian tribes connect themselves to Alexander and the Rus, and they say through Turan that they ended up in the Scandinavians, which explains a lot because there's lions from Africa on their shields. It's not exactly like Scandinavia is known for the jungles necessarily. So it's pretty obvious that they are legitimate. And the other thing is that they have to prove it in order to be royal. And so many of these lines are royal families that descend from Solomon and Muhammad, but also Solomon. So the Queen of England, for instance, descends from Solomon and Muhammad. And they have the scone stone, which is Jacob's ladder. He slept on the stone, and he looks up and he saw the angels ascending and descending, as above, so below. He then, the stone ends up in Scotland, and is the scone stone that all of the knighting and coronations and crownings occur upon the scone stone. In the 70s, someone stole the scone stone. They only made it out to the parking lot, but they dropped it. And so a small chip of it fell off, and it was lost allegedly in the gravel. This is a great story. I imagine it was on purpose, that someone just moved it so they could chip the stone.
Huh. So the lost piece was never recovered?
No, I think that someone has it somewhere in some royal home, unless it literally is in a Scottish gravel parking lot by a castle. I mean, irony and poetic justice, whichever way you want it, it's still good. But the royal families descend from some of the lost tribes. So do a number of other royal families in the Caribbean. In America, there are at least you mentioned the Jesuits. There are Knights Templar and Merovingians that claim descendants. There are nobility matters to certain families, and it's also important to note that foundlings matter. It's not just about nobility. A number of very important people have been foundlings, and it would seem to prove the point that beyond the Jesuits, who believed in liberation theology and this idea that they would be the fathers, right, of this new liberation theology state, that the Jesuit republic would have equality as altar boys that become knights. That the removal of genetics and of nobility as the essentiality was also important. So this happened at the same time as the Spanish Inquisition, right? That there's this creation of a distrust for these royal lines, and the Jewish faith has matriarchal lines. The Arabs do as well. The Christians started really pushing the paternity thing of the paternity lex of the Romans. So that's the complete transition there, and that's when it's no longer as important to your average foundling who their mothers were. The father becomes also, you can change the father could, it's less about choice all of a sudden during this period, and marriage is no longer an alimonious decision by two parents that are creating, an organized marriage a planned marriage for their children. All of a sudden there are all sorts of topsy-turvy things. So foundlings start to replace the orders as much as possible, but the noble families still run some of these groups, like the Knights of Malta, the Propaganda Do, which is mentioned in the Mafia video. There's a number of these very high up nobles that believe that they are special because they are noble. And who's to say?
I have not seen your Mafia video, but I find it interesting you talk about the Mafia, and there's a lot of things people don't understand about the Sicilian Mafia in particularly, which I am very interested in, not only because I sort of find Mafia heritage sort of interesting, but also because of my heritage. I'm Italian, so of course I want to look some of this stuff up and find out about it. But anyway, a lot of people don't realize that the Sicilian Mafia, not just here in America, but in Sicily and in other parts of the world, is largely responsible for a lot of the infrastructure that we have, around the globe.
Absolutely.
The buildings, the statues, even a lot of the presidents we've had here in the United States of America.
Oh, and all over South America too. I mean,
Yes.
the idea of families in this maritime period, we mentioned earlier, the land powers being replaced by maritime families.
Mhm.
This is how, after the collapse, after we call it the reset, that these places were able to continue on. You look in Iguazu or in Iquitos in the rainforest, and the main thing tying it together, besides the Arcadian Cajuns, was the Mafia.
Mm-hmm.
I'm particularly interested in Sicily as well because they have the stories of giants, and that this is where they inherited this empire. It makes sense that after the fall of these larger civilizations of larger people, that Sicily becomes important. But I think also Union Corse is probably the most, the Corsica. Corsica is so important, and people always think of, nobody thinks of Corsica. You know what I mean?
Right.
George Lucas kind of blew it up as Coruscant in Star Wars, but Corsica is important.
Okay, that's where that came from.
I believe so. And you think about the connections to the Mafia of Corsica. There several people who ran Corsica over the last few centuries were just explorers from around Europe that just took it over. And so the connections of these certain families on these islands have been all over the place. And people who were exiled, Bonaparte, Napoleon, right, from Corsica, and went back to Corsica. So Corsica becomes this weirdly hidden thing. But I think you can find so much of the world is actually controlled by Corsicans. It's fascinating.
Well, that's the thing about it, is like a lot of people here in America think the Mafia has been largely depleted by the FBI and CIA and other organizations, but that's not really quite so true. I mean, they have been tamed largely, I think, but they still exist, and they still do run a lot of infrastructures, and but they are still strong, especially in Sicily. And a lot of things that's happened, you think about Jimmy Hoffa, you think about JFK, and some of the other assassinations, Marilyn Monroe, and all the other deaths throughout throughout history that have occurred have all been Mafia tied in, and people don't realize that. And
but you also think about how they've incorporated themselves and made it more natural to be an oligarch. It doesn't have to be
Mhm.
so. I mean, Yakuza, for instance, will bring you flowers if you move into their
Oh,
neighborhood.
yeah.
So there's a number of examples where it's become fully incorporated into the state, or it's been at least parastate run. Russia for a long time has been run this way, but the problems occur when the government actually try to take over these things a lot of the
Mhm.
time. Now, you can't be saying the mafia is perfect. And there's a
Right.
lot of examples where, but it also looks like they were infiltrated in certain ways, not to the highest echelons right away, but to just some of the foot soldiers is all it took in the
Well
70s. And it made it possible to dismantle the systems of, as you said, infrastructure that were
Mhm.
created by them in Louisiana. Because before they went to New York, the mafia was mostly in, again, Louisiana, connected through the Arcadians. And by removing their power structures, even eventually isolating them in Las
Mhm.
Vegas and then taking Las Vegas, they have removed a lot of the power of these organizations, but the families are still important. And a lot of their families ended up in the FBI as,
Yeah.
Yeah, I
agents.
was going to say, isn't it like the mafia families that kind of created the whole concept of doing regime change? Like they came up with the concept of not only to do it, but the how to, like
Mhm.
101. We need to do like how do you go about implementing regime change? Take going into I don't know. Venezuela or something, and changing who the leader is so that he will play nice with our ideologies.
Well,
Right.
I'll tell you what's cool, Saji, is that this probably has nothing to do with what you're talking about, but what's cool is that actually at one time, and to serve their benefit as well, Vegas was doing really well, but they had a lot of uh, um, I guess you'd call casinos and stuff over in Cuba, and then the United States made it illegal for you to run casinos in Cuba and whatnot. And so they wanted to take down Fidel Castro. Well, what wound up happening was the CIA actually tried to hire the mafia to knock off Fidel Castro at one time, and then the whole plan fell through. And it was actually Bobby Kennedy who infiltrated and destroyed that entire plan. And there's a lot of things that went on there. I actually want to make a video about it, how the assassination of Bobby Kennedy and the assassination of John F. Kennedy as well is all mafia related.
The
And
Bay of Pigs. And, if you go back into the Tartaria thing, you can find that the Bay of Pigs is a thing everywhere. That when I went to Bermuda, I found the Bay of Pigs. And if you look around Papua New Guinea, you find the Bay of Pig. They would use, it's interesting that a lot of time Muslims don't eat pig and the Jews don't eat pig, that they're involved with this Bay of Pigs building. Who brings pigs if you don't eat pigs? But we find that these high civilizations that use 60 cycle hexadecimal number systems and are aware of distant stars, meaning they had crystal balls and lenses and everything else, that they immediately fell apart when they got parasites from pigs left on these islands. And so it's almost as if, and probably true, and it looks like we have enough written evidence of this as well, that it became a very common thing to leave parasite-ridden, festering pigs on islands and then come back a couple of years later, or a year later, after the locals had been completely destroyed. The population has been decimated, and their intellect has been seriously decapacitated. So there's a lot of Bay of Pigs stories going back to the beginning of the conquest after Tartaria, just bringing these, and that's another reason why religions at that time, about 1,000 years ago, especially, start saying, "Be very careful about pig."
well, hey,
Okay, I see how you did tied all that together.
but hey, I know that your time is very valuable and whatnot, and I just like to say before it gets away from us that I really appreciate having you on, and it's been very interesting in this conversation. I would like to do it again sometime if you ever have any time available. Just come on back. You're
Absolutely. I appreciate you guys having me on. I think it's been a really interesting conversation that we went a lot of different places with. That was pretty cool.
yeah.
Yeah, it really almost went exactly like I thought it would. I knew that if we just followed your lead, our own general insights and the things that we would want to know, you would be able to provide. And I know our audience probably enjoyed it as well. And to be quite honest with you, I don't want to say I'm a fanboy, but I am kind of a fanboy of your channel. And I know I've been I'm assume that
For
that
days,
I've
man,
been
for years. Yeah,
yeah.
man.
And,
Sagittariusly speaking, I mean.
yeah. So it's a big deal for me to be able to have you come on, and I'm glad we were able to make it happen.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Let's definitely do it again. And I hope you guys have a great night. And everybody listening, share it with your friends, share it with your family, share it and get it out there.
Yep, and let me chime in that it's definitely a pleasure talking to you in person, and I also enjoy your channel and your videos. And I'll ask this question from chat, although it don't really fit in, but we can ask it. As far as the Mandela effect, now, first of all, okay, I'll just ask the question. Although I find it hard to believe. I mean, you'd have to know everyone by heart to know that none ever changed. But have you noticed that sports scores? There's never been a sports score Mandela affected.
Isn't that literally what Back to the Future is all about? Yeah.
Yeah.
But it also means it also is pretty, intuitive. It's because all sports are rigged, right?
Yeah, or there's no fond memory of the White Sox winning the World Series on a particular year, but now they didn't, or anything and even in that range. You see what I'm saying? Sports is kind of left off off
I like
the grid.
this. I like this narrative. I want to look into that more. I really think that Back to the Future is revealing a lot more than people realize. And the entire trilogy's got so many layers when you start to watch how many times you're not even noticing that they're there, and that they're already they're in a loop watching themselves, like in the second movie. This has been already going on. And clearly Doc knows more than he's letting on, and he's setting this up to happen. So there's a lot with that. The other thing is the Kennedy aspect to Back to the Future, because Daily Plaza looks exactly like the square. It's the same layout. And when he goes to that shop, the vintage shop, you see 3 presidents who've been assassinated, but like Lincoln and is it Garfield? And then you also see a bust of JFK, but it's cut in the back. It's like a wall bust. So you see the back of his head's a straight cut where the shot would have taken place. And so there's a number of things. They say, who the hell is John F. Kennedy when he goes on the Riverside Drive? Right?
Yeah.
So there's a bunch there as well, connecting Kennedy to the Federal Reserve and the paying off of the bank and the silverback dollar, the Bay of Pigs, trying to shut down secrets and secret societies, people thinking he was building a tunnel to the Vatican or opening up one that was already there. There's a lot to be said. There's also a number of stories that didn't make it into Back to the Future that are in the original plan for Back to the Future 2, which is supposed to take place in the 60s. And if you read the screenplay, it gets into tunnel stuff as well. So, yeah, I think
that's what I like doing. I like listening to the commentary and reading some of the extras that came with the DVD box sets and stuff like that. So, yeah.
Right. Making a movie is like it's a total ritual. I mean, for some people, it literally is. They're into the occult, and it is literally a ritual, and plays and Masonic culture are very important because it's emulating something. So going through this isn't just to show you. I mean, paying for the movie pays it off, but that's not why they're doing it a lot of the time. It's more for some people.
In some directors more so than others. Like
absolutely,
Stanley Kubrick is an excellent example.
But I do think that even your most basic movie, if it costs at least $1 million, it's littered with Babylonian propaganda and Atlanticism. But I will look into the sports thing. I think there's probably there's something about that. Maybe so that people who were time travelers or something could go and they could play the games. Who knows? Or maybe those were the most important things. Maybe the simplest thing is that the scores and battles, I mean, that's what changes a name if the Bohemians versus the Tartarians win in Berenstain. So I will look into the sports score.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Definitely let us know, because Euler Greg has posed that question ever since the first time he's came on our channel to discuss Mandela effects. That is like his big $1 million question.
sports are clearly important. You think with the Mayans and trying to win these battles against each other. There's a lot to that. I appreciate it.
All right. Well, anybody got anything else they want to add? Other than that, I just want to thank you again, and I will be keeping in touch with you.
Thanks a lot. I will definitely watch this and send this around to my friends. And again, everybody go to andreas.me and exertus.com. And if you find one of the menu videos or about something that you think someone who's interested in, send that video to them. Thank you.
All right. Yeah. Any Hebrew?
Yeah, no, I reiterate what you said, and I'll reiterate what I said a while ago about possibility of us continuing the discussion somewhere down the road. And if you happen to run into Alex Jones, tell him I said hi.
I shall. I should be doing it soon. Actually, I gotta get down to Texas, so I will.
There you go. Well, yeah. So, Saji, throw it back to you.
Go ahead and take us out, my friend.
Oh, okay. Well, I'd like to thank every single one of our audience members who participated in chat, and of course our special guest here. And
Andreas Exertus.
Yeah, well, they knew who I was talking about.
Thanks, I appreciate that.
But I do enjoy. Apparently, I've watched your videos without even realizing it.
Yeah, I get the feeling that's true about the great majority of people. That helps me sleep at night sometimes. To think that there's a number of my videos have been reshared or mirrored on other people's channels. I've noticed my Dugan interview was on Ukrainian, Russian, and Greek websites, been mirrored by other people. So yeah, I know my first video had over 1 million views, and now there's the Vice video that people are watching on TV about Hollow Earth I'm in. So, by the way, if you haven't seen that, go check out the Hollow Earth special, In My Own World. Look for Andreas Exertus, In My Own World. But there's so many people that have seen me somewhere or heard me somehow, but don't even know who I am yet. So I appreciate that that's coming true, that people actually are able to figure out who I am so they can subscribe to find out more.
Where can we find that Hollow Earth special?
Yeah, if you look up, I know, like I saw an Odyssey, and if you have Vice TV, it's on there. And
I got
In My
Odyssey.
Own. Yeah, go look for Hollow Earth, Andreas Exertus, and you'll probably find it. Or In My Own World,
Cool.
Yeah. Thanks
right.
a lot, guys.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for being on, man. Appreciate it. And thanks, Saji. Thank you for having him come on, because this is all you're doing, my friend.
Well, I'm just glad we were able to make it happen.
Yeah. Make it happen, Captain. Well, anyway, with all that being said, this has been Shifty Sunday. I hope you guys all enjoyed yourselves. I know I did. And for Armor Up, Sagittarically Speaking, and Andreas, this is Hebrew77 saying, everybody have a good night, and we'll see you next time.
However.